My name is Noelle, and I'm a 40-year-old housewife. I want to share a bit about my family. I have a husband who is the same age as me and a daughter who just turned 16. I met my husband in college, and we fell in love and got married. Our relationship was pretty normal, but he is very different from me. While I have a rough personality, he is very detail-oriented and likes everything to be in its place. This obsession with order made me uncomfortable when we were dating, but I hoped that marriage would change things for the better. Unfortunately, that didn't happen. After we got married, he became even more particular, and I had to change my life to fit his rules. Despite my efforts to be tolerant, I couldn't accept all his behaviors. We often ended up in arguments, and my days felt exhausting with no time to rest. Our daughter was born 2 years after our wedding. My husband was thrilled to have a daughter, and I thought this might bring us some peace. I was relieved, but his attitude changed quickly. When a baby arrives, it's normal for parents to adjust their routines, but my husband didn't like that his schedule was disrupted. He would yell at our daughter when she cried at night and refuse to help with parenting. There were many times I thought about divorcing him because of his selfishness. However, I stayed for our daughter's sake, fighting hard to protect her, even risking my own well-being. Just when I thought I could manage, another tragedy struck, and it was connected to my daughter, the very one I worked so hard to protect. People often say children take after their fathers, and I desperately wanted my daughter to be different from him. Thankfully, she had my facial expressions, and I thought everything would be all right. But as she grew up, her personality started to mirror my husband's. By age 10, she began criticizing my cooking and would throw tantrums if things weren't in order. Now, as a teenager, she has entered a rebellious phase and even says hurtful things to me. I don't always let her have her way, so we argue often. It's painful because my husband usually sides with her and blames me. With both of them against me, I felt like I was constantly being criticized. One day, I woke up feeling very tired. I had a slight fever and was dizzy, making it hard to even walk or stand. I sat on a chair in the house, feeling weak, but neither my husband nor daughter asked if I was okay. Instead, my husband yelled at me, asking where I put his red tie and if I had washed his socks. It was clear they were only thinking about themselves. It was just a tie and some socks. Why did they make such a big deal out of these little things? Couldn't they pay any attention to me, at least for today? Somehow, in my foggy state, I managed to see them off before collapsing in the hallway. The next thing I knew, I was waking up to the familiar ceiling of the living room. I must have moved to the couch while I slept. I still felt tired, but after a good rest, I felt a bit better. It was nice to sleep so soundly, but I couldn't remember the last time I had felt this way. I gave in to that comfort and went back to sleep. When I woke up again, it was already dark outside. I glanced at the clock and saw it was past 5 in the evening. Panic hit me. I hadn't done most of the household chores, like laundry and dinner. I needed to at least make dinner, so I jumped up and rushed to the kitchen. Since I didn't have time to go grocery shopping, I had to use only leftovers to make a meal. "I'm home," my daughter announced as she walked in at the worst possible time while I was still in a rush. "Wait, you're still making dinner? That sucks," she replied, clearly annoyed. "I'm sorry, it'll be ready soon," I said, but she just ignored me and went to her room. A little while later, my husband came home from work. "What, you're still cooking dinner?" he said, sounding uncomfortable. He has a strict routine when he gets home, so he must have noticed things were off. After saying that, he went to his room. He usually starts eating 15 minutes after changing his clothes, which is also part of his routine. This meant I had only 15 minutes left to finish cooking. I rushed to cook, trying my best despite the rough chopping and the seasoning mistakes. I knew I had to finish before my husband came out of his room. I didn't want to face his reaction if I didn't. Just before he came out, I managed to finish plating the food. I felt a wave of relief wash over me, but it didn't last long. "What the hell is this?" my husband exclaimed when he saw the food. "What's wrong?" I asked, confused. "What's wrong? You have some nerve asking that," he replied, visibly upset. I didn't understand why he was angry. "This stir-fry is overcooked, the color is off, and the vegetables aren't even cut properly," he criticized. "I'm sorry. I was a bit rushed today," I explained. "Rushed? You're not working, so you have plenty of time," he said, and I couldn't forgive him for that comment. It felt like I wasn't doing anything right at all. Why did I have to be talked down to by a husband who didn't even notice how I felt? I was running out of time and patience. Before I knew it, I was screaming with all my might. "Do you have any idea how much I struggle every day?" My outburst seemed to shock my husband. I saw him take a step back, his eyes wide with fear. "What struggle? House chores can be done at your own pace. It's easy," he challenged. "What do you know? I can't just do them at my own pace," I shot back. I was beyond angry now. "I'm really sick today, you know. I pushed through and made dinner, and you didn't even take a bite. How do you think that makes me feel?" Tears started to fall as all my bottled-up emotions spilled over. Seeing my husband's face turn pale, I finally calmed down a bit, but I was still short of breath. I waited for him to respond. A simple "I'm sorry" would have been enough. But instead, his shaky voice cut through my hope. "Do you have any idea how much I struggle to support our family?" he said. "So you're saying I just live easy and free?" "I'm saying your job is to support me so I can focus on my work," he replied. "That's just an excuse. I'm not your slave," I snapped back. "Don't talk back to me," he yelled, and I could tell he was on the edge of losing control. I instinctively knew he might raise his hand against me, but I couldn't back down now. As I prepared to confront him with my next words, our daughter suddenly burst out of her room. "What are you doing? Your voices can be heard outside. Stop it. It's embarrassing." "Don't stop me. She's talking nonsense," my husband shouted back. "No, it's you being selfish. Just be quiet," our daughter reprimanded us, and it made us both pause. I explained what had happened, and after hearing both sides, my daughter turned to me and said, honestly, "Mom, you're the one who's wrong." My daughter's words shocked me to my core. "Why?" I wondered. "Because housework is your job, isn't it? Dad can't take time off work, even when he's not feeling well." "That's right. You're too lenient on yourself," my daughter added. I felt resentment rise in me as my husband echoed her sentiments, saying, "Mom is always late with her chores. Even today, you haven't done the laundry yet." "That's true, and you're not efficient. You can't even fold the laundry properly." Their words shattered my emotions into pieces. "So, you're both saying I'm not trying hard enough?" I asked, feeling defeated. "Maybe you're not," my husband replied. "I could probably do it better and faster," my daughter chimed in. "Yeah, you're too laid back. I bet we could manage without you, Mom," she added, and those words cut deeper than anything else. Was I really that dispensable? I thought we were a family, but they could dismiss me so easily. Faced with this cruel reality, I ran out of the house. Before I knew it, I found myself in a dark park with no street lights. My feet hurt as I sat on a bench and realized I had run out without even putting on my shoes. My tears had dried up, and my mind felt blank. How long had I been sitting there? Even if I stopped thinking, their harsh words wouldn't disappear. My heart felt broken. Recalling what my husband and daughter said filled me with resentment. I will never forgive them, I thought. My family, Who trampled on my feelings must face some punishment. The next morning, I finished the cleaning and laundry perfectly. For breakfast, I prepared a meal as extravagant as a dinner at a fancy restaurant. By the time I finished, my husband and daughter came into the living room almost at the same time. Without looking at me, they both took their seats. "Come on, let's have breakfast," I said. Their faces seemed to tense up even more. "Mom, what's going on?" my daughter asked, surprised. "Today's breakfast is really fancy," I replied. "Isn't it your 16th birthday today? Did you forget?" Yeah, I did forget," my daughter admitted. "You should at least remember your own birthday, right, Dad?" Yeah," my husband answered awkwardly. After exchanging a few awkward words, they started breakfast, but there was no cheerful conversation. It was clear they were both watching my behavior closely. I wondered if they didn't realize how much they had hurt me or if they just didn't want to admit it. It made sense with my husband. After all, he felt like a stranger to me. But my daughter, she was the one I gave birth to and raised. I wished she would grow up to be more considerate and kind. It wasn't entirely wrong to say that daughters resemble their fathers. She should have been able to understand me with proper upbringing. I do have regrets, but it doesn't matter now. "Listen," I said, and just one word from me changed their expressions. "What's going on?" my husband asked, his voice shaking. "Starting today, I'm leaving this house." At that moment, both of their faces went pale. "Hold on. Why?" my daughter asked. "You said you could do the housework better than me," I replied. "I didn't say anything like that," she protested. "Yes, you did. I'm sure you said it," I interrupted. I had never cut her off so strongly before, but she didn't argue further. Now it was my husband's turn. "You said I have more free time than you because I'm at home," I reminded him. "I didn't mean it like that," he defended himself. "Stop making excuses. You work in the real world." He had nothing to say. "Don't misunderstand. I'm moving to another house starting today, but it doesn't mean I won't come back to this house." "Stop. Today's my birthday, right? You're going to celebrate, right?" My daughter's voice was pleading, and her face looked like she might cry. I looked at her and laughed. "I'm sorry. I'm serious about this." Watching my daughter crumble at my words, I quietly stood up. "Well, I'm off." I left the house as I heard my husband and daughter screaming behind me. That day, I booked a hotel room not far from our house. I also rented an apartment on a monthly basis and started buying the things I needed. Even while I was busy, my phone was flooded with messages from the two of them. My daughter kept sending apology messages and calling me every 5 minutes. My husband, however, still couldn't admit he was wrong. He sent me messages saying things like, "What you did was outrageous." I left all their messages on read. It's so convenient these days to show my intentions without having to respond. 2 nights after I left, I returned home once. As I opened the front door, my daughter came running up to me at lightning speed. "Mom, you came back." "I just came back to pick up something I forgot," I explained, trying to untangle myself from her hug. I headed for the living room. Since I had only been gone for 2 days, there was no change in the living room, just as I expected. However, the kitchen was a mess, piled high with convenience store lunchboxes, ramen cups, and empty bottles. Even worse was the bathroom. Laundry had been left unwashed there. My husband and daughter often complained about how I cooked and folded laundry, but neither of them could do any household chores at all. Of course, I expected the current disaster since they knew I had left. My husband was in the living room, but due to his pride, he turned his face away after just glancing at me. I pulled away from my sobbing daughter and left the house silently that day. 1 week later, when I returned home to check on them, the house was filled with garbage. These two never cleaned up or even took out the trash, but the mess was worse than I expected. My daughter appeared through the trash, looking horribly dirty with disheveled hair. She should have been able to take a bath by herself, but it was clear her life was falling apart. Finally, my husband admitted he was wrong. "I'm really sorry," he said, kneeling in the garbage and rubbing his forehead against it. "Don't think you're going to be forgiven just by prostrating yourself," I replied. For a moment, the air felt heavy. My husband's eyes widened in despair. Next to me, my daughter was in tears. "If you really feel sorry, first clean up this house. If you can't do that, I'll divorce you," I warned. I get it. Please forgive me," my husband pleaded. He jumped up and started stirring the trash around, but he didn't even know how to clean up properly. In the end, I took charge and directed both of them in cleaning. It took 3 days, but finally, everything was perfectly clean. "Now, shall we continue the birthday party?" I said cheerfully, looking down at my husband and daughter, who were lying in the now cleaner living room. From then on, my husband took over all the housework. Even my daughter, who used to side with her father, was now on my side. Those days had been very hard and painful, but now I realize they were necessary.
Renee looked at herself from head to toe once more. There was only one such mirror in her rented apartment, a full-length mirror built into the door of a narrow but surprisingly spacious closet. She was truly unrecognizable. Her wheat-coloured hair had been replaced with long dark red locks. Light foundation masked her naturally swarthy skin, and she had painted her lips to appear brighter and thinner. The transformation aged her by 5 years and changed her so dramatically that even her grandmother might not recognize her. Her figure remained unchanged. There wasn't much she could do about that. She had borrowed a shabby blouse and loose pants from a neighbour. Though the clothes concealed her exact dimensions, her slender frame was still apparent. Yes, Renee was ready. Surely now Uncle John, the guard, wouldn't recognise her as the former employee who had been banned from entering the company office. She lingered before the mirror, debating whether to wear dark glasses. They would add to her disguise, but they might also raise suspicion. Besides, wearing sunglasses indoors would seem odd. "Glasses?" Renee slapped her forehead. "I could wear fake reading glasses. Such details really transform a face." Renee was going to warn Mr. Porter about the danger he was in. She had already lost precious time, through no fault of her own, but now she had to act. He had always been kind to her, and she would do anything to help him. She remembered her first day at the company, when its building had amazed her with its striking blend of concrete and glass. The building was both stylish and majestic, reminiscent of a gleaming Christmas tree. That was her first thought upon seeing the tall structure in the city's business district. Though initially intimidated, Renee quickly steeled herself. After all, she was only applying to be a cleaner, not an assistant director. She had spotted the vacancy online and applied. The salary seemed unusually high, perhaps even a mistake, but she decided to try anyway. In the lobby, she met a friend, gallant security guard, elderly but fit and athletic. He gave her detailed directions to the personnel department, where they were expecting her. As Renee climbed the stairs, she looked in her surroundings. She liked the place immediately, with its fashionable minimalist atmosphere and pleasant scent, a subtle mix of coffee and citrus. The interview was brief. Mrs. Emmett, the HR director, asked a few questions and hired her on the spot. No, "we'll call you." Mrs. Emmett simply asked when Renee could start, and the young woman was ready to start right away. She desperately needed the money. She had spent the month since graduation fruitfully searching for work in her field. Every application had been rejected. Only one honest HR officer had explained that employers now demanded experience, and the market was saturated with economics graduates. So Renee decided to return to her previous line of work. It was the work that had sustained her through her student years, when scholarships barely covered expenses. Renee knew how to clean. She'd learned as a preschooler when her grandmother still worked long hours, leaving young Renee to manage the household. From childhood, she understood she needed to care for her only living relative. They had no one else. Renee's mother had died of pneumonia when her daughter was just 3. Her grandmother explained how they'd mistaken it for a common cold, treating it at home and expecting it to resolve itself as usual. It didn't. By the time they got her mother to the hospital, it was too late for the doctors to help. That left just Renee and her grandmother alone in the world. As for her father, he had never been part of Renee's life. He likely didn't even know she existed. She was the result of a brief holiday romance, her mother, having saved enough for her first ever seaside vacation with friends, had fallen in love. She never revealed his name, origin, or any details about him, not even to her own mother. She kept saying that when Renee grows up, they would talk then. But that important conversation never happened. Grandma and Renee lived modestly but happily together in their cosy home. The girl studied hard, earned good grades, and stayed away from trouble. From a young age, she helped with housework and learned to cook. By the time grandmother came home from work, a delicious dinner waited on the kitchen table, prepared by young hands from whatever was in the refrigerator. The floors were clean and everything was in its place. "You're a good girl," the old woman would smile each time. She never took her granddaughter's help for granted. Renee grew into a bright young woman, studying with ease and earning her teacher's praise. Well before Renee's graduation, her grandmother began saying their small town wasn't enough for her. "You should go to the city to study and work. You're too smart for this place. Why stay here? I'll help you get into a university in the city." Renee herself knew that her beloved hometown, despite its charms, offered limited prospect. There were few options for further education. There was a construction school where most teenagers studied, but Renee couldn't see herself in that field. Jobs were scarce too. Her grandmother worked as a saleswoman at the store on the neighbouring street, spending long days on her feet. After her shift, she took on additional cleaning work. She worked tirelessly for the money they needed. Some townspeople worked at the nearby brickyard, while most women worked on the farm. The town had just a school, construction school, clinic and library. That was all. Besides, beyond the practical concerns, Renee yearned to leave her village. She dreamed of seeing the world, working in a city office building. Through hard work, she earned admission to a prestigious university's economics program with a full scholarship. This was no stroke of luck. Renee had worked diligently to achieve it. When her grandmother heard the news, she wept with joy. "Now your life will be better. Everything will be different," she said. "Even though I'm retired, I'll work extra shifts to send you money. You focus on your studies, my clever girl." At the time, Renee felt her future was secured. After all, she'd cleared the biggest hurdle, and she knew how to study. Reality, however, would prove different from her dreams, though she didn't realize it during those joyful days after her acceptance. At first, everything seemed perfect. As a non-local student, Renee received dormitory housing. She shared a room with 2 other students, which made studying challenging. The constant chatter, laughter, and occasional arguments never ceased. Still, Rennie appreciated that the dormitory was near the university. Unlike many students, she didn't have to endure a crowded subway. Instead, she enjoyed pleasant walks through the beautiful city streets. Then she found refuge in the university library, falling in love with it immediately. The quiet atmosphere, the smell of books, and the focused readers created an inspiring environment. Rennie maintained her diligent study habits, though she initially lagged classmates who had attended university preparation courses, an opportunity she never had. Despite this disadvantage, she loved her studies. She delighted in mastering complex economic concepts, analysing financial reports, and learning economic history. Within a year, she rose to the top of her class, making both herself and her grandmother proud. Her grandmother now worked double shifts at the store to send money, knowing city life was expensive. The scholarship, even when increased for good performance, wasn't enough to live on. Rennie deeply appreciated her grandmother's sacrifice. She knew the long hours at the store took their toll on her aging grandmother, who struggled with heart problems, back pain, and high blood pressure. Rennie dreamed of finishing university, establishing her career, and giving back to her grandmother, providing for better medical care and well-deserved rest. In her daydreams, Rennie saw herself as a successful professional in a stylish business suit, driving a luxury car to a towering office building. She imagined herself confident and beautiful, eager to tackle each intense workday's challenges. She liked a challenge. The girl realized that to achieve anything worthwhile required hard work. So she devoted herself completely to her studies, without taking time off for parties or distractions. Her dormitory neighbours were always running off to nightclubs or dates, then sharing their laughing impressions afterwards. They often invited Rennie along, but she always declined. Unlike these girls, she had no parents who could support her or help her get established in life. Rennie knew she would have to achieve everything on her own. This meant working extremely hard, though sometimes she felt she was missing important aspects of student life, bright moments passing her by. Rennie was a beautiful girl, and well aware of it. She likely inherited her looks from her unknown father, since her mother and grandmother were short and stocky, while Rennie had what her dorm mates called model height and appearance. "I don't understand why you're buried in textbooks with a figure like yours," her full-figured roommate Sue said thoughtfully while nibbling a pastry. "You could have found a rich man at the clubs by now, maybe even married him." "Beauty and youth are fleeting," Rennie replied, quoting her grandmother. "You need to think about the future and become self-sufficient." "Fleeting, yes," Sue agreed, "but while girls are young and beautiful, they should get what they can from men, especially when they look like you do." Sue sighed heavily. She constantly battled with her weight, trying various diets and joining fitness clubs, only to give up each time. Her bursts of determination were invariably followed by setbacks. Sue openly envied Rennie, who was naturally tall and slim, yet still shapely, like a goddess, as Sue put it. While Rennie appreciated the compliments about her appearance, she understood that looks weren't everything, and she couldn't afford to focus on dating right now. When sending her granddaughter off to study, her grandmother had warned her not to get distracted by trivial matters. "Don't repeat your mother's fate, of course. Having you was a joy, but a baby won't let you finish your studies. You'll have to work, and studying becomes nearly impossible with an infant in your arms. Education and career first, then personal life." Rennie agreed completely and acted accordingly. Then in her third year, her grandmother fell ill and had to quit her job at the store. Her pension barely covered utilities and basic food, let alone medicine. She could no longer help her granddaughter financially. "Forgive me, my girl," the elderly woman said, crushed. "I promised to help, but my body failed me so unexpectedly." "It's all right," Rini assured her grandmother. "All students work part-time nowadays." "But your studies, won't they suffer?" "Not at all. I've already built a reputation as a good student. You know what they say, first the student works for the grades, then the grades work for the student. I'll be fine." In truth, Rini was frightened. She worried primarily about her grandmother's health, but she was also concerned about her own situation. How would she manage both work and studies? But as the saying goes, the eyes fear while the hands do the work. She began searching through job listings for part-time work with flexible hours. Courier work wasn't possible without transportation. Walking would take too much time for minimal pay. Waitressing at bars or cafes wouldn't work either, as the long shifts would force her to miss too many lectures. Then Rini found an advertisement for a cleaning position. It was perfect. She'd known how to clean since childhood, and she could choose her own hours. She could work after classes or in the evenings, a few hours here and there, earning a decent income. Studies would become more challenging, certainly, but with determination she could manage. That was the main thing. Rini's life in her final years of study was incredibly difficult. She had to juggle countless responsibilities. Attending classes, grabbing quick snacks, running between buildings until her back and arms ached, and finally returning to her dormitory room. There she would study late into the night, sleeping only 4 to 5 hours at most. She still needed to eat, buy study supplies and maintain a decent appearance at university. Despite everything, Rini managed to send money to her grandmother for medicine. Life wasn't easy, and thoughts of anything beyond studying and work were impossible. She simply had neither time nor energy. Though Rini was interested in dating, she had briefly considered Connor from the Parallel group. He was tall, thin, and amusing in his oversized sweaters and large glasses. Sue had encouraged her to consider him. "Why are you dismissing Connor? Do you know who his father is? He has a position in the finance department. Connor is a promising match." But Rini brushed it off. First, how could she date with such a packed schedule? Second, Connor simply didn't spark any romantic feelings in her. He was somewhat awkward, though admittedly kind with beautiful eyes, but he wasn't her type. Most importantly, it wasn't the right time. Rini saw Connor as a good friend, rather than anything more, though he often helped her. When she missed lectures due to work, he shared his notes. If she was short on money in the cafeteria, he would cover the difference. Whenever Rini tried to repay him, he refused to take what he called mere pennies. He carried her heavy textbooks to the dormitory and sometimes drove her to various locations after class in his car. Yes, Connor had his own car. It was a gift from his father for getting into a prestigious faculty. Though Connor came from an entirely different world that Rini knew nothing about, he remained humble and down to earth, never showing a hint of arrogance. That's what Rini appreciated about him. She was grateful to have someone who cared, but she couldn't reciprocate his feelings. She never made promises and consistently emphasized their friendship. Yet Connor continued to look at her with loving eyes. She felt sorry for him, but what else could she do? Then came what professors called the final stretch. The workload was so intense that students could barely lift their heads from their textbooks. Rini had to quit her job, but she'd saved enough money for this crucial period. It would have lasted until she received her diploma, after which she could find proper employment. She was confident in her success. As a talented student with excellent grades, She believed employers would welcome her with open arms. She had worked so hard and was eager to put her knowledge into practice. Looking back later, Rini was amazed at her naivety. Then disaster struck. Her life savings vanished when she accidentally left her purse on a bench near the university. Though she returned within 5 to 7 minutes, someone had already taken all her money. She nearly broke down crying in public, knowing she couldn't recover it. She could file a police report, but finding the thief seemed unlikely. It would only waste time. Rini was desperate. How could she survive? Sue offered a solution. Tell Connor everything. He'd gladly lend you money to get by. That would be awkward. What's awkward about it? He'd be happy to help. He's been sweet on you since freshman year. Rini had no alternatives. She was jobless and finding work would take time. It would be weeks before she could earn her first paycheck. So she confided in Connor about her troubles. He expressed outrage at the theft, showing genuine sympathy, and naturally offered his help. Rini knew well that Connor was the son of a very wealthy and influential man. He had never needed money since he was already earning his own income. His father had already secured him a modest position at the ministry. But everyone understood this was only the beginning of Connor's career. No one doubted the guy would soon become influential and wealthy. My poor dear, you're so beautiful. It's incredible you face such a difficult fate, Connor said to her. A girl like you should live in luxury, enjoying shopping trips and expensive resort vacations. Not all this. Resorts, Rini grinned, who at 20-odd years had never seen the sea. What resorts? I can't even buy bread now. So you'll help me? I'll pay you back from my first paycheck. No, I won't, Connor said, and Rini looked at her interlocutor in surprise. I won't lend you, I'll just help you. But let's meet at the Scout Club today at 9. Do you know where that is? Rini nodded. The meeting place seemed unsuitable to her, but she wasn't in a position to argue. At the appointed time, Rini arrived at the club. Loud music, smoky air and drunken faces surrounded her. Vacant eyes and empty smiles everywhere. Rini felt perhaps too old-fashioned, but she couldn't understand the appeal. The crowd was so dense there wasn't room to move. How could she find Connor here? Suddenly he appeared, hugged her, kissed her cheek, and confidently led her away. They rounded a corner, slipped through a door under the stairs, and entered what seemed like a different world. The club's sounds became muffled. The interior was exquisite, the lighting soft. They climbed the stairs to a small room, resembling a private dining area. It contained just one table, with 2 leather couches. Have a seat, Connor suggested. Rini smiled and sat down. Is it just the 2 of us here? Are we expecting anyone else? The guy smirked, pouring champagne into a tall flute. Well, I don't know. You're enough for me. Connor handed the flute to Rini, who found everything about this situation strangely unsettling. This wasn't how she'd imagined meeting with Connor. So will you help me? Straight to the point. The guy shook his head. That's so typical of you. Always clutching, businesslike, purposeful. You should accomplish much with that character. I wish I could. But you can lose much too. What do you have in your life right now, besides work and school? These are your golden years, your youth. Well, what's my way out? The way out is right here. Connor smiled, pointing to himself. For your sake, I'm ready for anything. Probably everything. Rini suddenly felt uncomfortable. She clearly didn't like it here and wanted to leave immediately. You know I've been in love with you since freshman year. I tried dating others, but they... It's not the same. Connor moved closer. Rennie tensed, fearing he might hug her or place his hand on her shoulder, but he didn't. You only see me as a friend, I know, but I still hope. And now this situation. You finally need my help. I'm ready to give it to you. Ready for so much. Only if you're ready to. Connor, I think you've misunderstood me. Rennie tried to rise, but he grabbed her roughly, yanking her back onto the couch. She nearly fell backward. You're doing it again, playing hard to get. That's enough, you've gone too far. You're all I think about, no one else. You think I haven't tried to move on? Connor, I need to go, I'm scared. He studied her carefully, a strange grin playing on his lips. You'll get the money. 5 times what you asked for. No repayment needed, of course. Just one night with me. That's all I ask. Rennie felt as if she'd been doused with ice water. All this time, she'd thought Connor was kind and simple, even somewhat awkward. She'd believed his feelings for her were pure and genuine. Rennie had truly believed he would help her freely, as they'd been good friends for all these years, especially since the sum meant little to him. Now, however, disgust for Connor grew rapidly in her soul. He no longer seemed like a nice guy, with that predatory look of his. How had she never noticed before? The girl leaped from the sofa and rushed to the exit, Connor pursuing her. But Rennie was quicker. She ran faster than she ever had. She burst through the club, squeezed past the dancers, and sprinted out onto the porch. The girl ran blindly. She could sense Connor was chasing her. She finally stopped near the dormitory, catching her breath, amazed she'd run such a distance without seeing where she was going. Her heart was pounding like crazy. Tears came to her eyes. She was left without money, even though the problem had seemed solved. She'd lost a friend, a good friend, or rather, she'd realized she'd never had one to begin with. Sue, after listening, sighed heavily. What did you expect? I thought you understood from the start. Why didn't you agree? All your problems would have been solved at once, you fool. Rennie only sobbed in response. Finally, she could let herself cry. Her body shook with sobs. Oh, my dear, stop crying, please, Sue said, stroking her friend's head. I told my parents about your situation. They'll lend you money. Everything will be fine. But you'll need to pay it back soon, so don't delay finding work. They're not rich themselves, you know. Thank you, Rennie said. I'll pay everything back quickly. With the money from Sue's parents, Rennie could keep living and soon successfully defended her diploma. She encountered Connor several times at the university. They no longer exchanged greetings. Sometimes she caught his gaze, which made her uncomfortable. She was grateful he didn't try to speak with her. Rennie didn't know how she'd react if he attempted to apologize or, worse, insulted her. Then came the joyous moment when she received her long-awaited diploma. She had no doubts. As a promising young specialist, she would find a good job. Then her real life would begin. She would help her grandmother with medicines, repay Sue's parents, and buy nice things for herself. She dreamed of wearing beautiful clothes and eating good food. During her studies, she'd had to limit everything. But soon a different life would begin. How wrong she was. Reality proved cruel. As yesterday's graduate with no experience, nobody wanted her. Rejection followed rejection. She couldn't understand why until a recruiter explained it clearly. Employers needed someone who could start working immediately. No one wanted to deal with a recent graduate. Rene's situation seemed desperate. The money borrowed from Sue's parents was dwindling. She couldn't afford her rent. She'd had to lease a small apartment after losing her right to student housing. Trying to save her rapidly disappearing money, she went by foot to interviews across town. She ate more sparingly than ever, just milk, bread and cheap pasta. Of course, she could return to her village. While she wouldn't have to pay for housing there, what then? What work would she find? How would she survive? Her grandmother's pension was too small to support them both. Gradually, Rene reached a decision. Stop looking for work in her field. It wasn't going to happen. Better to take the familiar path and return to cleaning. An economist with honours, becoming a janitor. It was humiliating, but what choice did she have? Perhaps she'd find better work later. For now, she needed to earn a living. The girl quit her previous part-time job for the time of exams and preparation for the diploma. She had had no time then, focusing entirely on her studies. And now they no longer needed cleaners there. They were fully staffed. But finding similar work wasn't difficult. Rene knew how. Then an advertisement caught her eye. The office location was convenient and the salary seemed unusually attractive. Not expecting much, she called the number. They invited her for an interview immediately, and she started work the next day. Cleaning the building wasn't difficult. Yes, the area was large, but the surfaces were smooth, flat, and repair was recent. And the means of cleaning were expensive. High quality. In general, there were no problems with the work. Rene gradually met almost everyone on the team. Most were open and friendly. They treated the cleaning staff well, asking about her day and sharing their experiences. Some people didn't even say hello, of course, but this didn't bother Rene. After all, it wasn't her first time working as a cleaner. She was used to people not noticing the cleaning staff. They passed by, looked through them as if they were invisible. Rene wasn't offended or discouraged by this attitude. She had made some friends here, 2 young women from the personnel department, Linda and Naomi, who had also recently graduated from university. Their parents worked at the company and had secured them good positions with decent salaries. Linda and Naomi were inseparable, even looking like twin sisters, both smiling, blonde and slim. They were Rene's source for local gossip, teaching her who was at the company. Though this information wasn't vital to Rene, she found it fascinating. Alan Porter, the company's head, was a young man, just over 30, who had inherited the business from his father after the latter suffered a stroke. Despite his youth and initial inexperience, Alan quickly mastered the nuances of leadership and now ran the company with a firm hand. He was short, stocky and athletic, with intelligent dark eyes and a charming smile that he wore often. In general, he was quite pleasant. He regularly asked Rene about her schedule and whether she needed any cleaning supplies. He treated everyone as equals, speaking simply and naturally. Everyone at the company loved him, as far as Rene could tell. Alan was an ideal leader, moderately strict, understanding, and attentive to his subordinates' needs. He preferred positive reinforcement, though he could be stern when necessary. Rene had witnessed him sharply reprimanding a supplier who had attempted to deceive him. Mr. Porter's wife, Marissa, also worked at the company. She was slightly older than her husband, short, thin, with a pointed nose, tightly compressed lips, and small dark eyes that reminded one of a rat. Her expression was perpetually arrogant. Rene disliked her immediately, based purely on appearance, and her first impression proved correct. "Since you're here to work, then work," Marissa had told Rene one morning, running her finger along a dusty railing. When Rene explained she hadn't reached the 2nd floor yet, Marissa snapped. "For your salary, you should work faster." There are plenty of other applicants for this position. If you continue like this, I'll have you fired." According to Linda and Naomi, nobody liked Marissa. She held some vague position as an assistant to the head, though the secretary did all the real work. "She just creates an appearance of working," Naomi explained. "She struts around with an important expression, monitoring everyone," Linda added. "She craves power and money, but she's small time here. If it weren't for her husband, they wouldn't keep someone like her." What did he ever see in that rat? Naomi wondered aloud. According to Linda, who had heard it from her mother's friend, their parents had been long-time friends who had arranged the marriage to unite their fortune, almost like medieval royalty. When Renee asked about children, her personnel department friends explained that they had none. "Marissa can't have them," Linda said, though Naomi suggested it might be Alan's issue. Either way, they remained childless. Marissa spent her mornings prowling the offices, scrutinizing everyone's work. She'd made unpleasant remarks to everyone who spent too long at the water cooler or on the phone, speaking condescendingly even to employees twice her age. Renee observed all this while cleaning throughout the building. After lunch, Marissa would leave, claiming business matters. "She's off to beauty salons and shops," Linda declared confidently. There was no reason to doubt this. Renee had never seen Marissa doing actual work, apart from occasionally glancing at financial reports to track the success of the company. The office notably relaxed after her daily departure, as if a weight had lifted. "How does the boss tolerate her?" Naomi sighed. "Such a difficult person." "Oh, she might be different with him," Linda shrugged. "Don't you see, she knows how to play sweet when it suits her." "It's understandable. Alan is the man who provides for their family's fortune. She'll never get away from him." It had been about 6 months since Renee had taken the job, and she already felt like she belonged in this friendly team. She was invited to employees' birthdays celebrated in the office. People socialized with her, and she found joy in coming to work each morning. Though she continued searching for a position in her speciality, unsuccessfully, it was frustrating, but didn't dampen her spirits. Renee felt that everything, work, career, and love, still lay ahead of her. The salary was more than adequate. She could afford rent, food, clothes, and even help her grandmother. She had long since repaid her debt to Sue's parents, which brought her particular satisfaction. Sue, her old college friend, worked as an economist at the factory, thanks to her uncle's arrangement. Sue enjoyed her work and mentioned that a position would soon open up when one of the employees went on maternity leave. Though the factory's location wasn't ideal and the salary was lower than what she earned as a cleaner, Renee remained hopeful. With her diploma, she knew cleaning wouldn't be her lifelong career. It was an ordinary weekday afternoon. Renee was cleaning the central staircase, nearly finished with the first floor. Her back ached and her hands buzzed with familiar tension. Soon she'd be done and could rest. Then she heard footsteps from above. Someone was coming down. Renee moved her bucket aside to clear the path. It appeared to be Mr. Porter's visitor, a young man in an expensive business suit and snow-white shirt, tall, thin, and somewhat awkward. Suddenly, Renee felt as if struck by lightning. It was Connor, the same person she'd considered a good friend for years, until he'd treated her so cruelly at the end of their studies. He recognized her, too. He stopped, smiling, studying his former classmate with undisguised interest. Renee felt utterly uncomfortable, wishing she could disappear from his penetrating gaze. "Well, hello, beautiful," said Connor. "Hello," Renee replied softly. You work here as a cleaner? He emphasized the last word deliberately. Rennie nodded silently. She'd never been ashamed of her work, but from Connor's lips, cleaner sounded like an insult. The cleaning lady who thought she was a queen. I wasn't good enough for you. Well, fate has put everything in its place. There is justice in the world, Connor said mockingly. Rennie grabbed her bucket, ready to leave, his taunts unbearable. Wait! Connor caught her hand. What a nice discovery. Have you realized the mistake you made yet? Let me go, Connor. A penniless cleaning lady in a dirty coat, not a princess. Now you would agree to my proposal, right? But it's too late, I have someone. He paused. And you'll stay a beggar, working in dirty water until retirement. Don't you dare insult my employees. Mr. Porter appeared on the stairs, his eyebrows furrowed, his gaze stern. Connor deflated immediately, releasing Rennie's hand. You misunderstood. She's an old acquaintance. I'm just surprised that... Apologize to her, Alan demanded, and mind yourself better. Your reports are full of mistakes. I'm tired of correcting them. You're a specialist. Work like one. I'm sorry, Connor muttered, looking at Rennie. He clearly dared not disobey Alan, too much depending on the boss's favour. Alan continued on his way, Connor trailing behind. Rennie remained alone on the stairs. Her heart pounded, emotions overwhelming her. The dominant feeling wasn't resentment toward Connor, but joy that Mr. Porter had defended her. It touched her deeply. Mr. Porter was a genuinely pleasant, down-to-earth man, unlike his predatory wife. The entire team wondered how such a harpy as Marissa had landed such a wonderful husband. Their relationship seemed peculiar to Rennie. She noticed a distinct coldness between them, particularly from his side. They interacted like ordinary colleagues. No meaningful glances, no gentle touches, no playful banter. Their conversations stayed strictly business-related. Perhaps they'd simply agreed to maintain professional decorum at work. For reasons she couldn't explain, Rennie hoped Alan regarded Marissa at home with the same detachment, calm and indifferent. Rennie understood her feelings better after one incident. It was November. Mr. Porter was working late. The office had been empty for hours since the workday ended. The chief had been reviewing reports, first with his assistant, then alone, struggling to make the numbers add up. Rennie had just finished her second shift and was mopping the halls when it started pouring. The November evening was cold, dark and wet. She dreaded the thought of walking to the bus stop in such weather. Unfortunately, she had only worn a light raincoat that morning. The day had started sunny and warm, with no hint of the weather to come. She hadn't even brought an umbrella. She couldn't afford a cab. This month's money had gone to her grandmother's expensive medicines and winter shoes. Until her next paycheck, she needed to save every penny, and cab drivers would surely charge extra in this weather. With a heavy heart, Rennie finished cleaning. She went to the staff room, changed her clothes, and said goodbye to the night guard, and stepped onto the porch. She hesitated under the awning, reluctant to brave the icy rain. Suddenly, headlights cut through the autumn gloom. Rennie recognized Mr. Porter's car pulling up to the porch. She had thought he was still working on reports. While she had been changing, Alan had finished his work and gone down to the parking lot. He lowered his window and called out, "Rennie, it's pouring. Let me give you a ride." "Thank you. No need." Rennie knew his house was in an upscale village near the highway, quite far from her neighbourhood. "You're not dressed for this weather," he insisted. "The health of my employees matters to me. Don't argue. I don't want to look for your replacement while you're on sick leave." Rennie smiled and gratefully slipped into the warm, cosy interior, of his luxurious car. They chatted like old friends during the drive, discussing weather and movies, discovering they enjoyed the same series and actors. Alan asked about her life and was surprised by her story. "That's not easy," he said softly. All too soon, Rene's house emerged from the darkness. She didn't want to leave the warm cabin. She wished she could ride with Alan for hours more. His presence was so comforting. His conversation, his voice. If only the moment could last forever. Rene tried to hide her feelings, knowing the gulf between them. She was just a cleaning lady struggling to get by. And Alan had a wife, Marissa, elegant, well-groomed from a wealthy family. Rene knew she couldn't even dream in that direction, but she couldn't help. "Thank you so much," Rene smiled at Alan. He nodded and drove away, heading home to his wife. That night, sleep eluded her. She kept replaying their brief journey together. His words, his smile, his eyes focused on the road, his distinguished profile. That's when Rene realized, with a jolt of horror, that she had fallen in love for the first time, and with her married CEO, no less. What bad luck. At work, Rene tried to maintain her distance and avoid looking at Alan, yet something had shifted between them after that ride. Nothing concrete, but his greetings became warmer, more cheerful. Her heart would pound at the sight of him so forcefully that she wondered how others wouldn't hear it. One morning near New Year's Eve, with the office building festively decorated inside and out with twinkling lights, Rene was doing her usual cleaning routine on the top floor. She always started from the top and worked her way down. It was more efficient that way. Marissa's office was under the roof, its door ajar, a signal that cleaning was permitted. When Marissa wanted privacy to appear busy, she would lock herself inside. Rene quietly entered the office. It had 2 rooms, a small reception area for visitors, connected to Marissa's main workspace. Thinking the office was empty, Rene began cleaning the first room. She moved quickly and quietly, a habit developed over years of cleaning to avoid disturbing others. Suddenly, Marissa's soft voice drifted from the second room. "You think he's going to buy that?" "Why not?" A man's voice answered, vaguely familiar and somehow unpleasant. Rene froze. She immediately realized this was about something dishonest, if not criminal. She was eager to know more. Some inner instinct told her this conversation posed danger for Alan. "He will sign a contract with a couple of empty fields," the man said. "It's hard to suspect anything. I'll fill in the missing data later, and that's it. The firm will be transferred to me and therefore to you. Then you can finally leave your husband for me. And I'll be free from my father and his career plans. I don't want to work where he pointed to me. I want my freedom, my own business." "You are a promising and ambitious guy," said Marissa, her voice sweet like the fox from the Pinocchio fairy tale. "You have a brilliant plan," continued the man. "I've always liked women like you. Age gives you a special charm. Not everyone has it, but you certainly do." Now, be careful with your words," Marissa playfully scolded. "Especially about age. I'm not even 40 yet." All this seemed utterly bizarre. Marissa was actively flirting with someone. More importantly, she and her suitor were plotting to deceive Alan and steal his firm. Rene didn't know what to do. If she left now, they would hear her and realize she had overheard their conversation. What to do? The solution came naturally. Rene stepped toward the door and slammed it loudly, as if she had just entered. Marissa's disgruntled face appeared from the second room. Seeing Rene, she inhaled sharply. "You again?" the woman said coldly. Her companion remained hidden in the second room, pretending she wasn't there. I am, the girl replied. I could clean the floors now or come back later. Then Connor emerged from the first room, wearing a contemptuous grin. So that's who Marissa was talking to, Renee thought. No way! Are they lovers? Marissa and Connor had no idea she had been listening to their conversation. That was fortunate. Well, who do I see? Said Connor, spreading into a fake, friendly smile. An old acquaintance. You know each other? Marissa asked too eagerly. Of course, we studied at the university together. What? The cleaning woman has a degree? Yes, though it's not going to do her much good. Connor laughed. I see. Renee, come back later. We're talking here. You can mop the floors another time. Marissa's gaze shifted between Renee and Connor. Something seemed to dawn on her, and suddenly she added, No, don't come back later. You're fired. Pack your things and leave. Renee hadn't expected that. Even Connor gasped in surprise and turned to his mistress. Marissa, what are you doing? She's been irritating me for ages, always appearing at the wrong time, taking too long to clean, chatting with everyone. You think I didn't notice you speaking with Linda and Naomi from HR instead of working? I won't do it again, Renee whispered childishly. She needed this job, this salary. She needed to see Alan daily, even from afar, even just a glimpse. It had become vital to her existence. Leave your bucket right here. We'll find a replacement immediately, don't worry. I'm going to HR now to prepare the termination papers. They'll be ready by the time you change. You haven't been meeting expectations for a while. Renee turned and left the office. She rushed down the stairs to the staff room, thankfully empty. She collapsed onto the couch, buried her face in a pillow, and sobbed. She felt humiliated, deceived, and utterly helpless. Marissa clearly hadn't realized Renee had overheard her conversation with her young lover. They had meticulously planned to steal Alan's business. But Renee hadn't lost her job because the boss's wife suspected her knowledge. No, Marissa was simply jealous of Connor's attention toward her. Despite his cruel behaviour, Connor still looked at Renee in that special way. His feelings remained strong, and Marissa saw that. About 30 minutes passed as Renee tried to control her sobs and compose herself. She didn't want to face people with swollen lips and red eyes. Then Naomi and Linda burst into the staff room. They rushed to hug Renee and began telling her something soothing. We know everything, Linda rambled. Marissa stormed into the personnel department, furious as a Valkyrie. Like a harpy, Naomi corrected. She looked more like a harpy, frightening like that. She said that she was dismissing you for incompatibility with your position. Why did she get so angry with you? She was terribly angry. Did you say something to her? Renee shook her head. Don't you know, Marissa? Linda sighed. Remember how she threw out Helen and Mrs. Wells? She doesn't need a reason. She's just an angry, impulsive person. And Alan isn't right here now. We hoped he would save you, but he's away on a business trip for 2 days. You're still here? Marissa asked in an icy voice. No one had noticed her entering the staff room. Linda and Naomi fell silent, watching the local tormentor. They wondered if she had heard them calling her harpy, but Marissa seemed focused only on Renee, looking at her like some pathetic, nasty insect. I'm leaving already. At home, Renee cried once more, then suddenly realized she couldn't leave everything as it was. She had to warn Alan about the danger he faced. He needed to be especially careful with the documents his spouse and Connor were showing him. Her friends had said he'd be gone for 2 days. Perfect. Rennie would go to the office then, head straight to his office and tell him everything. He could decide what to do with the information. But 2 days later, her plan failed. The guard, who had always treated Rennie kindly, wouldn't let her past the gatehouse. "It's not allowed. Marissa ordered not to let you near the doorstep," he reported apologetically. "How? Why?" "I don't know what you've done to upset her. Probably nothing, it's just how she is. But please understand, I can't risk my job. I have a son in university and a daughter who needs help. She's raising my grandchildren alone. I'm so sorry." Rennie nodded in understanding. She couldn't get into the office, and she still could try waiting for Mr. Porter in the parking lot by his car. But no, she needed a different approach, and it formed in Rennie's mind instantly. This plan required preparation, so Rennie went straight to the cosmetics store. Yes, cosmetics. She needed makeup brighter than usual, and a wig, preferably inexpensive. Standing before her mirror, Rennie saw how the wig and makeup transformed her face beyond recognition. Shapeless clothes completed the effect. She was unrecognizable, exactly as planned. Marissa had ordered them to keep Rennie out, but neither the guard nor her own grandmother would recognize her now. She could get into the office unhindered and finally talk to Mr. Porter. He was definitely at work today. Naomi had confirmed this with Rennie that morning. The guard didn't recognize the brightly made-up middle-aged woman as the young former employee and let her go to an interview. Rennie stood in front of Mr. Porter's door. Finally she would see him again. She had missed him terribly. Though it had only been a few days since she'd last seen him, she yearned for his look and smile. Something had to be done about these feelings. Rennie opened the door and froze. The scene before her was unimaginable. Alan lay convulsing on the floor, his face ashen, his eyes dark with pain and horror, foam coating his lips. Marissa stood over him, wearing a strange smile. But then she startled and fixed her gaze on the visitor. "Who are you?" Marissa demanded, staring at the unexpected visitor. Confusion crossed her face. She had clearly forgotten to lock the door. Rennie remained silent. She stared at Alan in shock, realizing that in moments it would be too late to save him. She spun around and raced down the corridor, shouting, "Ambulance! Call an ambulance! Mr. Porter is ill!" Ambulance arrived quickly. Alan was rushed to the hospital, with Marissa accompanying him. This raised alarm bells in Rennie's mind. There was no telling what Marissa might do during the journey. Somehow, Rennie knew with certainty that Alan's wife was behind his seizure. That telling smile as she had watched him suffer. Rennie was terrified. What if Alan couldn't be saved? People gathered around her, all the employees she knew, bombarding her with questions about what had happened and who she was. 2 months had passed since that fateful visit to the office. Alan had recovered and left the hospital, while Marissa and Connor faced investigation. Rennie had returned to the company, now as an economist. The department had an opening and Mr. Porter hired her. She threw herself into the work enthusiastically, grateful to finally put her knowledge into practice. Life had settled into a peaceful rhythm. Yet 2 months ago, her world had nearly shattered. She had been so frightened for Alan, but he had survived. Tests revealed poison in his blood. Without the ambulance, he would have died, leaving no trace of poison for an autopsy to detect. They found poison residue on a water bottle. It bore numerous fingerprints from both Marissa and her young lover. The investigation proceeded swiftly and thoroughly, despite interference from both Marissa's and Connor's influential parents. Marissa wanted to leave her husband, but not empty-handed, and aimed to take his business. Her young lover had a dream of becoming a businessman. Connor hated his low ministry position, chafing under his father's control and his superior's authority. He craved freedom, adventure, and quick money. The couple first attempted to trick Alan with a deceptive contract. When the experienced businessman didn't fall for it, the lovers turned to Plan B. Marissa obtained the substance. Everything seemed to be working perfectly. Alan drank the water his wife offered and began to choke. At that moment, a vibrant stranger with red hair and colourful clothing burst into the office. She assessed the situation instantly and called for help. When Alan regained consciousness, they told him about Renee and he called her. They spoke for an hour. Renee broke down in tears, from relief, from overwhelming emotion, from the joy of hearing her beloved's voice again. She began visiting him in the hospital. They talked endlessly, neither wanting to part. When Alan discovered her economics degree with honours, he insisted on hiring his saviour, but not as a cleaner. After his discharge, Alan asked Renee on a date. She wasn't surprised. It felt inevitable. Their relationship deepened quickly, and Renee felt blissfully happy. She dared not imagine what might have happened had she not arrived at the office that day. Mimi was walking through the hallways of the building, which belonged to a large architectural and construction company. The firm wasn't just a monopolist in its field, it was a shark that devoured any competitors. Mimi's scarlet slip-on shoes clicked a jaunty rhythm with each step. Try as she might, she couldn't suppress the smile spreading across her face. "Hello," Mimi nodded to colleagues she met on her way. "Good afternoon," Mimi got in response. "Happy New Year!" exclaimed one of those enthusiasts who started preparing for the holiday at the first sign of December or the first snowflake. "And to you too," Mimi sang back. The company's staff reminded her of an anthill, everyone either busy with something or pretending to be. There were so many employees, it was impossible to know them all. Yet there was a delightful atmosphere within the team. Everyone felt like family, and this was the chief's doing. Mr. Riker devoted considerable attention to his employees, regularly organising holidays, corporate parties, and team-building events. Mimi hadn't participated in any events yet, having joined the company only 3 months ago in the advertising department. That's why she was especially looking forward to the New Year's corporate world. Word had it, these celebrations were always spectacular. This year, Mr. Riker had rented the city's finest restaurant and organised a masquerade ball. Mimi had already chosen her dress and mask. However, her fiancé, James Donnett, wasn't particularly thrilled about this development. He had initially objected. "Mimi, this is simply unprofessional, unethical. How can we work in the same company?" "What do you mean, how?" Mimi had snorted mockingly. "You've kept me waiting for 3 years. If we had been married, then you wouldn't have had such stupid thoughts. Are you waiting for my first wrinkles? Then I'll be unwanted." "What are you talking about?" James had replied sheepishly, hugging her. "I only want you, but working in the same building isn't right. What will people say?" "Have you seen your building? I thought they'd give me a map and compass when I got hired." Mimi had rolled her eyes. "It takes a week of running from wing to wing, beating a drum, just to meet someone you know. It's so massive. I wouldn't be surprised if there's a bunker underneath. Besides, our departments are on different floors. I'm on the first, you're on the third." But James hadn't given up right away. He'd grumbled that there were plenty of advertising jobs in the world, and Mimi shouldn't have chosen his company. Eventually, though, his resistance faded. He accepted it. Besides, Mimi had been so busy at first that she barely had time to see James. Even now in December, their department was swamped with work. Today, however, Mimi made time to find her lover. It was James's birthday. She wanted to give him his gift at the office. James was an engineer with his own small office, something he took great pride in. Noticing their romance had cooled somewhat at work, Mimi decided to rekindle the flame and tease James a little. Yesterday, she'd had her hair cut and coloured, exactly as she wanted, though she'd paid the hairdresser handsomely, only to barely notice any difference in the mirror. Her manicure was fresh too, decorated with December-inspired snowflakes. But what really made Mimi smile slyly was what lay beneath her formal suit, a luxurious set of lace lingerie she'd received from James for her birthday. She'd never had the chance to wear it before. Mimi felt like a movie heroine as she anticipated James's reaction. No, she wasn't planning anything too adventurous in his office. She wasn't that bold. She planned to give him his gift, then playfully open her jacket to tell him she'd be waiting at a hotel that evening. She'd already booked a room and ordered champagne on ice. She'd passed the empty desk of the boss's secretary, young blonde Kelly, whom she'd always jokingly considered competition for James's attention. Taking a deep breath, she knocked briefly and opened the door. "Mr. Donnet," she sang playfully, "I have a special delivery for you." Mimi froze in the doorway. Her smile turned to a mask before crumbling completely, her eyebrows shooting upwards. "What the—" Mimi whispered, disbelieving her eyes. "What is going on here?" James jumped away from the secretary like a scalded cat. Kelly tugged at her skirt. One stocking with its lace band had slipped down. Kelly blushed, clutching her skirt to hide the black lace bodice. Mimi swallowed, struck by an absurd realization. She and the secretary were wearing identical lingerie. The jerk hadn't even shown imagination in his choice of gifts. "Mimi, how did you get here? On foot? Tell me, James, are you an idiot? You didn't even lock the door. Who cheats like that?" Mimi snapped, slamming the office door behind her. The man stood dumbfounded. Kelly blinked her huge eyelashes ridiculously like a doll. Mimi had a simple reason to close the door before anyone saw those ugly scenes. Being betrayed was one thing, but having it become office gossip was another. She didn't want to face pitying looks and become the subject of workplace drama. "Mimi," James called out, fixing his hair and taking a step toward her. "Let's talk calmly, okay?" Mimi wrinkled her nose, turning away. "Button your fly, you idiot," she snorted. Mimi was in pain. It hurt so much that breathing became harder with each moment. Still, she wouldn't show her feelings. No, she wouldn't give the traitor such satisfaction. On the contrary, let him think she didn't care. "So that's why you didn't want me to work here," Mimi said thoughtfully. "Didn't want to keep all your eggs in one basket." Kelly hummed and suddenly found her voice. She crossed her arms over her chest, her blonde hair mussed from James's hands. The girl was admittedly spectacular. Legs that went on forever, plump lips. Even in winter the blonde maintained a tan, which always sparked a hint of envy in Mimi. She herself couldn't achieve a chocolate tan even in summer, turning pink like a suckling pig instead. Her skin was too delicate. As an adult, Mimi had accepted this fact and given up tanning altogether. "You know what? It's good it turned out this way," the secretary said haughtily. "James has loved me for ages and wanted to break up with you, but he pitied you. Because of your sick father, but you can't keep a man through pity forever." James turned pale. "Who's sick? Dad?" Mimi burst out laughing. "Listen, James, if you knew my father was ill, why didn't you tell me? Not that I care. After all, he abandoned me and my mum when I was 8 to run off with his mistress. But You could have mentioned it." The blonde pouted. It was obvious that an unfamiliar activity was occurring in her head. Thinking. She shook her head dismissively. "Who cares? Did you know James and I have been vacationing together all along? It started at last year's New Year's corporate party. This year would have been our anniversary, and then you show up right before the party." "Kelly, shut your mouth!" James growled, his face purple, fists clenched. Mimi licked her lips, thinking frantically. She remembered his behaviour after last year's corporate party. He had vanished for 24 hours, then reappeared at his flat and treated her extra sweetly. Just guilt from cheating. But not enough guilt to end his affair with his boss's secretary. "Mimi." The man moved too close, trying to grab the woman's hands. Mimi recoiled as if he were plague-ridden. "Don't touch me. I'm not fully vaccinated," she hissed. James looked at her reproachfully, which only fueled Mimi's anger. "You know what? Your blonde's right. It's good this happened, because I couldn't keep quiet any longer." Mimi fired words like bullets, barely thinking. "I'm dating another man. I met him here at work, fell in love instantly. Finally understood what real feelings are. But I felt sorry for you. We'd been together 3 years. I didn't want to break up before the holidays. I'm not completely heartless." James's face contorted. He looked like a child whose favourite toy had been snatched away. "You're lying!" he shrieked. "Who else would you want but me?" Mimi raised an eyebrow. "Well, apparently someone does." "You couldn't have found anyone," James argued, sensing deception. "Did you think you were irreplaceable?" Mimi gave a sad smile. "I pity you, James. It's hard falling from heaven to earth, but you're a mediocre fiancé. Besides, didn't you notice something was wrong? I've been avoiding you for 3 months. Couldn't even look you in the eye." Mimi was lying. She'd just been busy with work. But James took the bait, remembering how she'd cancelled dates, claiming work meetings. However, the ex-fiancé didn't give up easily. "So, you found someone new?" He narrowed his eyes. "Fine. You'll bring him to the New Year's party, right? He works here, doesn't he? That's what you said." Mimi looked away, embarrassed. Oh no, her tongue let her down. She'd blurted out the first thing that came to mind, and now she'd have to deal with it. "Do I need to prove anything to you?" Mimi stepped backward. "You said yourself that workplace relationships are trendy. I won't parade my feelings around just to spite you." "Our company's quite open to romance. We're one big happy family." James grinned, studying Mimi's face. "So feel free to walk hand in hand with your new fiancé. Nobody will mind." Mimi grew nervous. The man sensed it and smiled wider, regaining his composure. "Mimi," he shook his head. "Stop this nonsense, okay? I can tell you're making this up. Let's talk this through calmly. I care about you, you know? All this physical stuff means nothing. We're adults. We should forgive each other's moments of weakness." Kelly let out an indignant shriek, but James didn't flinch. Mimi, however, got furious. "Moments of weakness," she repeated, savouring the words. She clapped her hands twice, then stepped close to her ex. Standing in heels, she was almost at eye level with James, which bolstered her confidence. "But I have news that might upset you, James. I wasn't lying. Since you're so eager to see who I traded you for without a second thought, I won't come alone. And you two, enjoy yourselves." "Well, how was the date?" Holly asked, noticing her friend. Mimi gave her a frown. "I have only one word for you. Adultery," she muttered. Holly shrieked and spewed out questions. "What? With whom? He?" Then, noticing other people's interested looks, she grabbed her colleague by the elbow and dragged her away. "Come on, you need a smoke." "But I don't smoke," Mimi frowned. "Then you'll smoke passively next to me. Here, I haven't had a drink yet. Take a coffee. I understand that now you'd be happier with something stronger, but we have what we have." She shoved the drink into her friend's hands. Mimi nodded gratefully and took a big sip. The coffee was very milky and sweet. Usually, Mimi preferred strong drinks, but she had no choice. "Tell me everything about it," her friend demanded, flicking the lighter. Mimi briefly explained her predicament. "Now I have to find a boyfriend for the corporate party." Mimi groaned in despair, squirming in the winter wind. The young women had run out of the building without jackets. "Well, that's not much of a problem. We have plenty of men. We're a construction company," Holly consoled her, inhaling from her cigarette and letting a cloud of smoke drift into the air. Holly's cigarettes smelled of cherries and sometimes chocolate. Mimi was against such bad habits. Life was already fragile, with enough things trying to kill you. She wouldn't deliberately poison herself every day. But now Mimi's hands itched to hold a cigarette and smoke, gracefully like in the movies. She imagined a thin cigarette between her fingers and the smell of cherry tobacco giving her confidence. "Oh, do you want me to lend you my Sam for the corporate party?" Holly brightened. "What?" Mimi burst out laughing, almost choking on another sip of sweet cappuccino. "Your fiancé?" "Why not? He's handsome. Put him in a jacket and he looks like Johnny Depp before he married Amber Heard. And your James and my Sam have never crossed paths." Holly nodded. Mimi smiled wider, tilting her head. "Holly, you're a miracle. You're even ready to share my fiancé." Mimi wiped away a tear of laughter. Her heart filled with warmth. Holly was a marketer and the first person who had taken newcomer Mimi under her wing and never let go. A rumble came from the backyard. Mimi and Holly flinched at the sound. A truck pulled into the warehouse. The loaders bustled like ants, dragging boxes from the truck into the building. One box slipped. "Careful, lads," called a young man, deftly jumping out from the van to the ground. Mimi froze. The tall brunette looked gorgeous, even in his dirty blue overalls, the kind that looked like children's clothes. He wore an unbuttoned work jacket over them. His thick black hair was dishevelled. His eyes were bright blue, like sapphires. His jawline was sharp, his cheekbones well-defined, a face that made an impression. The loader's shoulders were broad, his work having clearly developed his muscles. Mimi's imagination took flight. She pictured herself, radiant with smiles, entering the restaurant on this handsome man's arm. He'd need a suit and perhaps a shower, but those were minor details. Her James would surely go mad with jealousy, seeing Mimi with such a guy. James himself was short, already developing a pot belly, and at 30 his hair was thinning at the nape. He claimed it was hereditary and dreamed of hair transplants in Turkey. Following her friend's gaze, Holly smiled, catching Mimi's thoughts. "Found yourself a date for the night?" "He's quite something, like he stepped out of a designer jeans ad and landed here. Think he'll agree to the adventure?" Mimi licked her lips, considering how to entice him. The thought of lacy lingerie beneath her jacket crossed her mind, but she quickly dismissed the shameful idea. "William, will we get a bonus? We're working like Santa's elves here," one worker called to the brunette. The brunette smiled as he helped lower a crate, handling it effortlessly. "I see," he nodded. "There's plenty of work since all the clients decided to use their budgets, so let's smile and keep at it, guys." The men laughed and continued working. Mimi, shivering like an aspen leaf and turning blue from cold, kept watching her target. The man worked steadily, pushing carts and moving loads. When the other took a smoke break, the brunette, unfortunately for Mimi, kept working energetically. But she couldn't wait any longer. She risked turning into an ice statue or ending up in hospital instead of at the masquerade ball. "Wish me luck," she mumbled and strode toward the loader. There was just one problem. Her shoes weren't made for snowy paths and had no grip. As Mimi neared her goal, her foot hit a snow-covered puddle. "Ouch!" Mimi cried, throwing up her hands. "Oh, I wish it wouldn't be a fracture," flashed through her mind as she imagined coordinating her dress with a cast. But she never hit the ground. Strong, steady hands caught her. The woman opened one eye, then the other. Her heart did a sweet flip. She found herself in the brunette's arms. "Are you all right?" he asked, still holding her. Mimi, blushing, leaned on his firm forearms and steadied herself. "Yes, thanks to you," she smiled coquettishly, or at least she hoped she looked coquettish. Her chattering teeth made it look more like signs of a stroke. "You should be more careful," the man advised, and turned to return to his abandoned cart. But Mimi, quick as a cheetah, grabbed his elbow. "Actually," she blurted, "I came to see you." The brunette turned around again, looking intrigued. Mimi swallowed, tucked her honey-red hair behind her ears, then pulled it out again. "Look, my proposal will seem strange, but please listen and help me if you can." "Will this be a long conversation?" asked the man, studying the petite girl thoughtfully. Mimi blinked nervously. "Well, I know you're busy. I'll try to keep it brief," she rambled. The brunette's smile softened his sharp features. "That's not what I meant. You're shaking. It's painful to watch." He shrugged off his jacket and, with one sweeping motion, draped it over Mimi's shoulders. "That's better. Now, let's talk." Mimi stood dazed, automatically wrapping herself in the jacket that still held his warmth and cologne. She unconsciously breathed in deeply, catching notes of freshness and citrus. "So, what's your name?" she asked resolutely. "William." "I'm Mimi. Tell me, William, do you have a girlfriend, a fiancé, a wife?" No, and no." He smiled wider, making Mimi flush. "Wonderful," Mimi exclaimed, then quickly backtracked at his surprised look. "I mean, I wish you happiness in your personal life, of course, but I desperately need a bachelor, just for one night." She held up her index finger, gazing pleadingly into his handsome face. "One night. You understand?" "Not really, but I'm intrigued." "No girl has ever asked me to spend the night quite like this. Won't you at least take me on a first date? Buy me flowers? Treat me to dinner?" William asked with a boyish smirk. "You misunderstand." Mimi glanced at the cart. "Tell me, how much do you earn as a loader? For unloading goods, for instance." "Enough for bread, and if I'm lucky, butter too," he replied, crossing his muscular arms. "What if I paid you more? I'm not rich, but I have savings. You'd play the role of my fiancé, preferably one who's head over heels in love with me, just for one corporate party night," Mimi suggested. "A simple business arrangement, nothing more." The man visibly considered it. Mimi stepped closer, noting that he towered over her by a head and a half. "Tell me, would extra money before New Year's Eve be unwelcome?" "No, it wouldn't," he agreed, failing to hide his smile. Mimi brightened. "See, you benefit and I get what I need." "But why do you need this?" he asked directly. "Surely there are eligible bachelors in our company." Mimi hesitated momentarily, then decided to tell all. If she was taking this handsome man as an accomplice, he should know what wrong they were righting. "Today, I caught my fiancé with his mistress in his office. and he knows how I feel about cheating. My father cheated on my mother. I caught him with his mistress when I was little. I told my mother, and for years I thought their divorce was my fault. Knowing all this, James still did this to me," she burst out. "In my anger, I claimed everything with him was over and that I'd fallen for someone else at work. But James didn't believe me. He expects me to bring this supposed colleague to the corporate party. I want to prove him wrong, and I want my companion to be so handsome that James thinks he is like a Greek god descended from Olympus." Mimi trailed off, not noticing her listener barely containing his laughter. "So, I meet the criteria?" he asked slyly. "I had no idea I had Greek gods in my family tree." Was Mimi embarrassed? Yes. Was she backing down? No. "You'd have to ask your parents. I definitely see something of Apollo in your features," she offered the compliment. "Are you flattering me?" The brunette eyed her suspiciously. "Yes," Mimi nodded matter-of-factly. "Is it working?" 100%, nodded William, grinning. "All right, Mimi. Truth is, I wasn't planning to attend the corporate party. I don't particularly enjoy noisy events or watching the accounting department get drunk. But now I'm rather tempted." "So it's a deal?" Mimi jumped excitedly and nearly slipped again. The man caught her swiftly, pressing her against his firm chest. "It's a deal," he nodded, looking into her face. "But my services might not come cheap." "I'll agree to anything except loans," Mimi declared. "Won't need those," the brunette assured her. The conspirators exchanged phone numbers, with William promising to call that evening. Mimi wanted to meet several times to discuss the details. The first meeting took place in a cafe. When Mimi arrived, William was already waiting at the table, clean and tidy, in a black, plain turtleneck. "We don't have much time," said Mimi, sitting across from him. "We have our whole life ahead of us," William replied philosophically, and signalled the waitress. "I haven't ordered. I don't know what my fiancé likes. My deepest apologies." "That's precisely what I wanted to discuss," Mimi began, placing a thick folder on the table. "Here, I've compiled information about myself, and about us too. I want you to learn the history of our fake romance. How we met, how we hid our feelings." William choked on his tea. "Oh, will there be an exam? Are cheat sheets allowed?" Mimi frowned. "Can you be serious? You want to earn money, right?" "I really do," nodded the man, taking the folder. To her surprise, William pushed the folder aside. "Let's do it another way. You want to play it straight, don't you? So let's just pretend we're having an affair. Tonight is our first date, and I'd like to get to know you better." Mimi looked into his bottomless blue eyes and was stunned. She had to pull herself together and remind herself that everything happening was a farce, one she would pay for out of her own pocket. However, the more Mimi and William met, the harder it became to convince her heart that there was nothing here for her. William's company made her head spin. He was gallant, cheerful, and sincere. He told Mimi about himself, though he preferred not to mention his family. "I work as a loader when the company has too many deliveries," he confessed as they walked around the city after dinner. "I have another job, but it's boring. When I was a kid, I dreamed of being a captain. Then I climbed on a ship at the playground. You know, those iron ones they used to have in courtyards. I fell off and broke my leg. I even saw the bone. That's when I decided I didn't want to be the new Magellan. I'm fine on land." William lifted his trouser leg, showing the scar that had turned white with time. Mimi responded by showing him her battle wounds. "Here on the knee, look." Mimi rolled up her trouser leg. "I got this scar crossing a river, jumping on rocks in my grandmother's village. The rocks were slippery, and I fell and hit myself. And this one I got falling on glass while jumping from garages." "You like to jump?" The man shook his head. Passers-by looked curiously, some with disapproval, at the couple showing off their legs to each other. But the man and woman seemed oblivious to others around them. "I dreamed of becoming a figure skater when I was a child, but we couldn't afford skates then. And after my dad left, my mum had little time for me," Mimi remembered thoughtfully, watching the snowflakes. "I never learned to skate." William cast a thoughtful glance at her and smiled. Their next date was at the ice rink, on the shopping centre's roof. Mimi kept falling down, taking William with her, but it didn't hurt. It was pure fun. After several delightful evenings together came the night of the corporate party. William picked Mimi up in a luxury foreign car. "You look astonishing," William said, opening the door for her. The woman hopped into the leather interior and giggled, shaking off her legs. "It's all the mask. Cover half your face and you instantly become more handsome," she joked. "Where did you get a car like this? You didn't steal it, did you?" "Borrowed from a friend," William winked. "Can't take the princess to the ball in a shopping trolley, can I?" "Very cool," Mimi admired. Then she looked at the driver and couldn't suppress an amazed sigh. In the cabin light, she saw a transformed William in a luxurious suit. He was no longer William from the warehouse. He was Bond, James Bond. "Ready to take revenge on James?" he asked. "Who?" Mimi asked, then blushed deeply. "Oh, yes, I am." She turned to the window. Embarrassingly, amid all their romantic meetings, she'd completely forgotten their main goal. She hadn't even thought about her ex while with William. He'd so captivated her with this romance that she'd almost started believing in it. Mimi's mood fell. She realized it would all end soon, dissolve into the night, like Cinderella losing her prince at the final stroke of midnight. And she no longer cared about James and his Kelly. She wished the night would never end. She felt his palm cover her folded hands in her lap. She sighed and looked at him in surprise. "What's wrong? You're wrinkling your dress." "Nervous?" He smiled gently, barely squeezing her thin fingers. "No. Well, a little." Mimi pulled her hand away, surprising William, but pretended to adjust her mask. "We still haven't discussed your fee." "There's time for that. Let's enjoy ourselves first. We'll discuss business later," William hummed, returning his attention to the road. At the restaurant, Mimi checked her coat. William put on a small black mask that concealed little. He offered his elbow and smiled. "Shall we?" She nodded meekly and, heart pounding in her ears, wrapped her arms around his. Mimi had prepared herself for many things, but not this. For a moment, even the music seemed to stop. The room was already full of guests. Everyone who noticed the new arrivals began whispering to their companions, drawing attention to the couple. "Why is everyone staring?" Mimi asked nervously as they descended the stairs under countless gazes. "You have to ask? Because you're stunning," William whispered in her ear, sending pleasant shivers down her neck. Mimi snorted, flattered but not quite believing him. "There's your ex, our engineer," William said cheerfully. "Let's go over to them. Time to put all my preparation to the test." Before Mimi could object, William had taken her hand and was leading her through the crowd. Some guests parted, nodding and almost bowing, while others tried to stop him. "Mr. Riker," an accountant with a flushed face, blocked their path. "Your first time at the party. How wonderful! Will your father be joining us?" "Yes, a bit later." William smiled politely, staring around the dazed woman. Mimi began connecting all the facts. William had always avoided talking about his father, only mentioning his mother, an artist. But before the thought could fully form in Mimi's mind, James appeared before them. Kelly stood next to him, pouting, offended. She stared at William, nearly dripping saliva on her dress.
"James, I heard you were eager to meet me, although technically we already know each other," William began. "I'm sorry, but I won't shake hands. And you probably won't be pleased either. After all, I confess, I stole your woman. What's strange about that? If you don't keep your eyes on the treasure, someone is bound to steal it."
James turned pale. He looked at his ex and at the chief director's son, but couldn't accept what he saw.
"By the way,"
the man drew Mimi to him,
"perhaps I should thank you. Mimi was worried she might hurt you, but I see everything is fine on the personal front, except that it's customary for us to work in offices, and you seem to have forgotten that fact."
"Mr. Riker," the man was sweating,
You've got it all wrong." "I think I got it right. Well, I'm sorry to spoil your party, but the matter is urgent. I'd like to leave all the bad things of the year behind, you know?"
"What are you talking about?" The man was frightened.
"You're overstepping your authority. It's just that you've been using your office like a cheap hotel room for dates. I've learned you requested money for additional expenses, but it wasn't used for its intended purpose. I hope on Monday you'll account for every penny. If not, then please leave our company," he nodded at Kelly, "and take everything with you."
"But, Mr. Riker—"
"My father knows everything," William hissed, "and I will soon take over his duties. You don't need to congratulate me on my promotion. I'll do without."
Then William turned to Mimi and smiled softly.
"Let's go have fun?"
Mimi nodded, casting a fleeting glance at James in farewell. Nothing in her chest twitched. No gloating, no pity, nothing. It seemed the vacant place in her heart had already been occupied by someone else. William and Mimi had a wonderful time. Mimi felt like a princess at the ball. Holly was happy for her friend, as was Sam. Soon, Mimi learned the truth. It turned out that William had simply helped the men in the warehouse that day. Being well brought up, he was no stranger to any work in the company, having started from the bottom. That said, William didn't exactly frequent the offices, so neither Mimi nor Holly had recognized him. Midnight was approaching. William asked Mimi to dance. They slowly circled around the hall. People still watched them, but not so intently. Mimi, breathing in the aroma of citrus perfume and feeling another man's heartbeat, could not stand it and decided to learn the truth about what had tormented her all night. "Why did you agree to this? You obviously don't want the money," she said.
"Happiness isn't in money," grinned William. "I just couldn't miss the most unusual date of my life."
But the date wasn't real."
"Who said so?" He raised his eyebrows. "There was me. There was you. There was chemistry between us. I think it was real."
Mimi's head was spinning. "But you said your services would be expensive. You just tricked me."
"But I didn't ask for money," the man retorted. "I said your scam might cost a lot, but it's not about money."
"What is it about?" Mimi didn't notice how they stopped. William still had his hands on her waist, not letting her move away from him. Mimi's heart was racing.
"About the fact that I might enjoy playing the role of your fiancé," said William. "I wasn't sure about it then. After all, love at first sight isn't my story. But you can't fool your heart. The more I got to know you, Mimi, the more I was convinced I was right."
"I don't understand,"
mumbled Mimi, stubbornly disbelieving what was happening. I'm interested in you. You occupy all my thoughts. You make my heart beat faster. I like you, William answered her patiently and sincerely. With you, I constantly want to smile, to see you more and more often, and I really hate parting. I think I've fallen in love with you. So, now you're going to have to pay for your prank for a long time. Probably for the rest of your life. If you don't mind, of course. Mimi didn't mind, but she couldn't answer. She didn't have the strength. She simply pitched forward. William leaned towards her. Their lips merged in a long-awaited kiss. Midnight struck. However, the magic didn't dissipate. On the contrary, it was just beginning.
Aspen and birch trees flew by outside the train window, translucent against the vast endless fields behind them. October, nearing its end, was swiftly erasing the remnants of golden autumn, as if hurrying to take away everything that reminded people of sunshine and bright colours. Arlene moved away from the window, tucking her neck and chin deeper into her jacket collar and burying her hands in her pockets. She wore sunglasses, inappropriate for such a cloudy, sunless day, but they made her feel safer and calmer. The train car was nearly empty, save for an elderly man a few rows ahead, identifiable by his tired, slouching back and grey hair, and closer to the exit a quintessential middle-aged gardener, surrounded by bucket of late-harvest apples, her determined face clearly showing her disappointment at having no one to talk to during the journey. Arlene enjoyed train rides, sitting unhurried, listening to the rhythmic clatter of wheels, feeling her thoughts gradually slow to match their measured pace. She needed that calmness now more than ever. Arlene had no idea where she was going or why. No one awaited her, and she herself expected almost nothing from life any more. The young woman couldn't help contemplating what to do next with her strange, seemingly ridiculous life. Surprisingly, Arlene considered her childhood happy, at least from age 2. She arrived at the orphanage at age 2, and Mrs. Minton entered her life. "Hello, what's your name?" Mrs. Minton asked, approaching the little girl. Looking closer, the woman sighed with admiration. The girl's tangled hair was remarkably beautiful, thick and dense, a rich wheat honey colour. Arlene raised her eyes to Mrs. Minton's, and the woman's heart melted. They were green, with a confident, mischievous expression unusual for an orphaned child. "My name is Arlene. And yours?" the little girl answered seriously, maintaining eye contact. "My name is Sarah Minton." "So, Sarah," Arlene decided instantly. Despite the orphanage staff's efforts, the stubborn girl refused to use her teacher's full name. Eventually they gave up, and the widely respected Mrs. Minton remained simply Sarah to her. From an early age, as Mrs. Minton recalled, Arlene made her own decision. "Sarah, I want to take up judo," Arlene announced unexpectedly one day. "What? Judo? But you're a girl," Mrs. Minton responded, both shocked and indignant. "So what if I'm a girl? I'm going to do judo." Arlene gave her teacher a defiant look, furrowing her brow as usual. "I've already visited the school and enrolled in classes." Mrs. Minton shook her head with a smile and arranged trainings for the girl. "Mrs. Minton, I've decided to become an accountant," Arlene announced near the end of the last year at school. "You? An accountant?" Mrs. Minton shook her head in disbelief. "With your algebra grades?" "I have a whole year left," Arlene replied firmly, and put her best efforts to improve her knowledge and enroll college. Arlene felt good at college, For the first time in her life, she felt like just another person, one of many, no different from the rest. That was the paradox. While most people strive to stand out from the crowd, to become as noticeable as possible, Arlene, tired of the orphanage stigma, and strived for the opposite. She was comfortable among her simple, not particularly wealthy classmates. At the end of third year, a guy named Kenneth joined their group. Just another guy, nothing special, Arlene decided. But after she helped him escape from some drunk guys at a disco, using a few clever moves, he developed boundless respect for her, and they became friends. One evening after class, they sat on a bench, chatting cheerfully about nothing. "Arlene, have you thought about an internship?" "I'll probably go to my orphanage and ask to work in their accounting department." "What can you learn there? Counting sheets and diapers?" "Listen, why are you pestering me? I'll figure it out myself," Arlene replied, trying to end the uncomfortable conversation. "Wait, don't get angry. I have an offer. My uncle has a firm. They sell supplements. Are you interested in an internship there? And if they like you, they might hire you after college." Arlene looked at him incredulously. "Really? Are you serious? I'm an orphanage girl, Kenneth." "So? What's that got to do with anything?" Kenneth looked at her cheerfully. "You're an excellent student. My uncle doesn't need a blue-blooded countess. He needs an accountant. So, deal? I'll call him today and tell him you're coming." When Arlene arrived at Kenneth's uncle's firm for her internship, she found a company with an impressively long name, occupying an entire floor in a large office centre. The huge room was arranged in the style she'd seen in movies, computers and photocopiers everywhere, young professionals hurrying between desks, endless phone conversations, and fingers flying across keyboards. Everything was in motion, giving the impression of a successful, forward-thinking business. After the bustle of the sales department, the accounting department was an oasis of calm. They sat Arlene in a corner with an impressive stack of papers and asked her to check for stamps on all documents. Though the task was basic, Arlene was happy. She had gotten into a real commercial firm, and life here was clearly thriving. She would gain experience, become an excellent accountant, and maybe even become a manager someday. Best of all, she'd make good money. Delighted with her first day, she called Kenneth that evening and thanked him profusely. "Come on, Arlene, it's nothing. We look after our own," he answered cheerfully. The remainder of studying flew by, and Arlene received her diploma. Kenneth kept his word about the job, and in early September, Arlene was hired as an accountant at his uncle's company, which imported and sold dietary supplements. Arlene had never used such preparations herself. The young woman received a good salary regularly, though the work wasn't particularly difficult. Arlene checked warehouse inventory, printed shipping documents at the salespeople's request, and delivered them to the warehouse. After 3 months at the firm, the director called her in. "Well, how have you settled in?" he asked, laughing gleefully, as was his habit. "Thank you, I hope I'm doing well," Arlene replied shyly. "Don't be modest. Everyone praises you," the chief said generously. "Well done. I want to promote you. Starting tomorrow, you'll be my senior accountant for shipments." Arlene couldn't believe her ears. Only 3 months of work and already a promotion. It seemed like a fairy tale. And she wasn't even 20 yet. What would come next? Then everything happened very simply. A couple of weeks later, Arlene arrived at work and immediately found herself in the tight grip of a masked man in camouflage. She was roughly pushed into the nearest office. Until today, It had belonged to their commercial director. The office was strangely bare. No laptop that usually sat on the desk. No enormous mug with "Genius" written on it. "Your documents," ordered a man in police uniform. After checking her passport, he tossed it onto the table. "Well, tell me the whole story," he drawled, staring at Arlene. "Tell you what," she whispered, her lips white. The officer's gaze terrified her. "Everything in detail. How and to whom you sold uncertified products, where the money went. Everything." The intimidating man rocked in his chair silently. "I have nothing to tell," Arlene said, her mouth dry and nausea rising in her throat. "Of course. The good old I don't know anything, didn't see anything, didn't hear anything." He laughed. The next day they called her for questioning. "Listen, Arlene Tanner, we don't need to prove anything. Your signature is on the documents shipping fake products. Any expert analysis will confirm this. If you maintain your innocence, claiming you know nothing, you'll still get a sentence. The maximum. 5 years. And if what you've been selling is classified as poison, even longer." The investigator leaned back. "If you confess, write it all down honestly," he continued, suddenly switching to the informal "you." "I promise special consideration and 2 years maximum. Then you'll get parole. Do you know what parole is?" Arlene shook her head fearfully. "You'll get out earlier with good behaviour. Besides, why fear going to the zone? You've been, in the zone all your life." He was clearly pleased with his witty remark. Arlene felt physically ill from this man's presence and his cruel words. She could barely think, her mind clouded by hunger, exhaustion and fear. "Come on, Tanner. Decide quickly. I don't have all day to sit here with you," the interrogator barked. Arlene saw Mrs. Minton before the trial. The woman looked terrible, as if she might die right after hearing the verdict, which Arlene received as dry, indifferent legal jargon. It was over. Life stopped for 6 long years. Her sentence for illegal production, sale of substances and their analogues, which their supplements were deemed to be. None of her colleagues appeared beside her in court. The interrogator's promise of a reduced sentence for confession proved completely false. Mrs. Minton never recovered from the shock. A few months after the trial, while Arlene was in the colony, she learned that the only person who had ever loved her had quietly died of heart failure. Arlene wanted to forget the years she spent in the penal colony, to erase that time completely from her life, but she knew this was naive. No one would let her forget her past. To the stigma of being from the children's home was added another, far worse: convict. Nothing could change that. But one thing remained in Arlene's power: to prevent this darkness from defining her, from growing inside and becoming her essence. The train stopped at some station, waited the required time, and continued on. Through the vestibule noise came loud talking, thumping against walls and harsh laughter. Minutes later, the inner door slid open, and 3 men entered, their unwashed hair hanging in greasy clumps, eyes narrowed menacingly, mouths fixed in perpetual sneers. Shouting and cursing with every word, they swaggered down the aisle like they owned it. Thugs, thought Arlene indifferently, closing her eyes. I mustn't interfere. I'm not allowed to. Immediately she heard an indignant woman's voice. "Stop! Hey, what are you doing with your hands? Someone call the police!" Her screaming suddenly ended in a gurgle. Arlene's eyes snapped open as she jerked upright, instantly alert. The woman sat clutching her stomach, eyes bulging, mouth gaping helplessly. Buckets lay overturned, apples scattered across the car. The men stomped on the bright, juicy fruit with hoarse laughter, crushing them to pulp. An elderly man Arlene had noticed earlier was rising from his seat. "What do you think you're doing?" he asked, the most pointless question possible. Here we go, Arlene thought grimly. It's starting. Her trained body tensed and positioned itself, arms slightly bent at the elbows, legs tucking under the bench. This happened automatically, independent of conscious thought. Just as an animal's muscles prepare for attack, her body responded to the situation. "Oh, Defender Knight!" One of the guys, clearly the oldest in the group, spread his arms and bowed mockingly. "Is that your girlfriend?" They laughed in unison. "Well, now you're going to pay for you and your girlfriend. Come on, what have you got in your pockets?" "Young men!" The man stumbled. It seemed repulsive to speak normally to those who had long ago lost their human appearance and ability to think. "We are young people, and you're an old stump. We're going to speed up your funeral." The guy shoved the man hard against the bench, striking his face simultaneously. Something metallic glinted in the thug's hands. A knife or brass knuckles, Arlene wondered, making a mental note that the armed attacker would need to be neutralized first. "Hey guys, back off before you get hurt." Arlene's voice cut through the air, drowning out the sounds of the rowdy group. The carriage fell silent, except for the quiet moans of the beaten woman. "What?" The leader finally spoke, obviously recovering from his shock. "What did you say?" "You heard me. Take your filthy gang and get out of here fast. But apologize first." The guy looked like he might burst. His face, ears, and neck flushed purple. His accomplices stood behind him, managing meaningless glances, clearly waiting for their leader's command. Arlene sized them up instantly. Drunk, high, or both, they posed no real challenge to her. She felt no fear. She knew she could handle all three, especially the one who could barely stand. The issue wasn't their threat level. She just wanted to avoid trouble. With her parole certificate at stake, she didn't need police involvement. Though she knew these degenerates only understood force, she still hoped for a peaceful resolution. She rose smoothly from the bench, unzipped her jacket, and positioned herself about 10 steps from the boys. A knife, after all, she realized, before the man could reach her. She met him with her shoulder and twisted his knife hand in one fluid motion, dropping him to the floor with a pain-filled shriek. After delivering 2 solid kicks, she sent the fallen knife skidding under the benches and faced his companions. It took mere seconds. "Well, losers, who's next?" she taunted. No one stepped forward. "Then get out, now!" The guys quickly collected their leader, who lay crumpled on the floor, and hurried toward the exit as the train slowed for another station. "Police!" the woman suddenly screamed, now that danger had passed, and she felt bold enough to demand justice. Arlene glanced anxiously at her and, buttoning her jacket, walked to the opposite end of the carriage. She decided to exit at the next station as a precaution. "Girl, please wait!" she heard behind her. Arlene turned. The elderly man hurried after her. His refined professional face, as Arlene had labelled it, remained agitated, with a bruise swelling rapidly on his cheekbone. "Wait! How can you let them go like this? They need to face the police. They must be held accountable," the man said, breathing heavily as he walked. "Look, I'm not getting involved. If you want to pursue it, that's your choice," she replied, continuing toward the vestibule. The man, no longer insisting, stopped and moved to the last seat before the exit. Arlene entered the vestibule and leaned back against the wall, watching the street through the shaking door window. At the next stop, she stepped off and breathed in the fresh, damp autumn air with pleasure. The light rain that had fallen throughout the journey had ceased. Checking the posted schedule, Arlene saw that she had nearly 40 minutes until the next train.
"Sweet girl, forgive my persistence,"
came a voice from behind. The elderly man from the carriage had followed her onto the platform. Arlene startled. Her eyes stung inexplicably, her throat tight. No one had called her sweet girl in years, with simple human warmth, free of mockery or crude implications.
"I followed you. I'm sorry. I must thank you. You saved me too. I understand why you avoided further trouble, to protect yourself. I understand that, but think of others. They'll continue this behaviour. People will suffer. They need to face consequences."
"Look, please leave me alone. Just back off, grandfather," the young woman snapped, hoping to discourage him from a 40-minute lecture until the next train arrived. The man seemed to realise she had no interest in discussing reform strategies for train hooligans and stepped aside. The train arrived punctually. Arlene inhaled deeply, gladly entered the car, settled into a corner window seat and stretched her legs. The old man boarded the same car, sitting several rows away but facing Arlene. The day's early start was taking its toll. Arlene began nodding off to the rhythmic clatter of wheels. She jolted awake as the train stopped, and opening her eyes she flinched. The persistent old man now sat directly across from her, studying her face intently. After she met his gaze, he became visibly excited. Some kind of lunatic, Arlene thought wearily, standing up. The man followed. As she walked along the platform toward the city exit, she sensed him behind her. Her patience wearing thin, she stopped abruptly and turned. "What do you want from me? Make it quick!" She narrowed her eyes menacingly.
Please, forgive my pestering, but your face, your eyes, haven't we met before?"
The old man peered at her imploringly. "No, we haven't. I'd remember you. You're impossible to forget. You're so persistent and annoying." Arlene tried to escape the man's presence.
"I'm sorry. I started the conversation wrong. My name is Mr. Toffler. Would you allow me to know your name?"
Arlene was shocked by the elegance of the phrase addressed to her. Despite her intention to get rid of the persistent old man quickly, Arlene found herself responding, Arlene Tanner."
"Nice to meet you, Arlene. We've introduced to each other, so now you won't be able to refuse me if I invite you for a cup of coffee,"
said Mr. Toffler, stopping in front of the coffeehouse's huge floor-to-ceiling window. Behind the glass flowed a leisurely, unhurried, incredibly cosy life. The soft light of small lamps flickered, and just one glance at the plush sofas with cushions made her whole body ache with desire to sink into them. All this was so strikingly different from what had surrounded Arlene for the last years in prison that she longed to plunge into this magical life, to feel like a normal person. The door to the coffee shop opened, letting visitors out onto the street. The enticing smell of coffee and fresh pastries wafted toward them. Arlene's stomach rumbled so loudly that she worried everyone on the street must have heard it.
"Arlene, I insist. I must thank you somehow for my rescue,"
said the man, gesturing invitingly toward the cafe. Half an hour later, they were sitting at a cafe table, chatting easily. More precisely, Mr. Toffler did most of the talking, while Arlene listened and ate, savouring every bite of the delicious food.
"Arlene, forgive me, but I must ask something that's been bothering me.
Are you certain we haven't met somewhere before?" He looked at her pleadingly. "No, Mr. Toffler, we couldn't have met, that's for sure. 4 years ago I graduated from college. Before that I lived in an orphanage. And lately I've been vacationing at a prison, from where I'm now following my place of registration." Having finished, Arlene leaned back in her chair and watched the elderly man expectantly. She anticipated his benign, intelligent face would show horror, fright, priggishness, all the typical reactions people have toward an orphanage child who's been in prison. She expected him to jump up, yell, perhaps even accuse her of tricking him into the cafe. Arlene was prepared for any reaction, but what happened next caught her completely off guard. Mr. Toffler froze with his coffee cup halfway to his mouth, then carefully set it on its saucer and laughed. He laughed so genuinely and infectiously that Arlene couldn't help but smile herself, though God knows there was nothing funny in what she had just said. After his laughter subsided, Mr. Toffler said, "Well, Arlene, you are full of surprises. You're truly remarkable. Would you like something more to eat?" "No, thank you," Arlene replied timidly. "I'm about to burst as it is." "Well then, tell me, where exactly are you headed? Someone's expecting you, I hope?" "No one," said Arlene thoughtfully, twirling her teaspoon. "Arlene, dear, I'd like to be of more help to you than just buying you dinner. Perhaps you need a place to live, money, or a job." "Listen, Mr. Toffler," Arlene set her spoon down with a clink. "Did you hear me clearly? Do you understand who I am? I'm an ex-convict with a record and a very, as they say, dubious past. I just got out, you know." "I heard you perfectly well, Arlene, and I understand everything," Mr. Toffler answered calmly. "I'm offering you help, fully aware of the situation. I know you're tired and need to rest. Look around, get settled. If you need my help, please call me." He handed Arlene a business card. "My son owns a business. We'll certainly find you a job." "Thank you," Arlene mumbled, staring at the tablecloth. When she finally reached home, she washed and scrubbed herself for a long time, rinsing her hair and skin until the shampoo ran out, as if trying to wash away all the dirt people had thrown at her. The next day, after registering with the district police officer, she went looking for work. After receiving several outright rejections, where they didn't even try to hide the reason, she decided to try the employment centre. Watching the girl at registration handle her release certificate with 2 fingers, as if afraid of contamination, Arlene realised she couldn't endure such humiliation. Well, nobody forced him to offer, Arlene thought a day later as she dialed Mr. Toffler's number. "Hello, it's Arlene," she said childishly into the receiver. "Arlene!" came the old man's joyful exclamation. "Now I have your number." The day before, Mr. Toffler had visited his son's office. He rarely did this, trying not to distract Andrew from the complex task of managing his vast hotel and restaurant enterprise. His son was a classic workaholic who had built a fortune and a stellar reputation, but had somehow missed his chance at happiness. Now, the elderly man had come to tell his son about the incident on the commuter train and about Arlene. After Mr. Toffler detailed yesterday's events, showing the bruise on his face, Andrew whistled in surprise. "Well, Dad, you really got yourself into something. What were you even doing on that train? Is it so difficult to call for a car and driver? Like I've asked you to many times." "Andrew, that's not the point right now.
I want to help this girl, I really do. Well, what do you want me to do, Dad? Let's give her whatever money she needs. A lot of money. And let's end this discussion, okay? Money, 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 Mr. Toffler exclaimed. You can't see past the money. She's a human being, wounded, exhausted. Oh, Papa, please. From what you've told me, she can beat up anybody. No, Dad. The image of a poor, defenceless girl doesn't quite fit, said Andrew. Enough! The old man shouted at his son, as if addressing a delinquent schoolboy, rather than the owner of a big company. If it weren't for that girl, you'd be identifying me in the morgue right now. Silence fell over the office. Okay, Dad, I'm sorry. So what do you want? You want me to get her a job. Okay, I'll see what I can do. And I'll instruct my personnel department. No, you have to see her yourself, talk to her. At least do it for me. Mr. Toffler was inexorable. You must see her. He emphasized the last word meaningfully. What for? Andrew said tiredly. Dad, I don't even meet the heads of our other offices myself. And here's some girl who's been in prison. I don't care about your branch managers, but this girl matters. Andrew, darling, I don't know what's going on here, but she's extraordinary. She came from nothing, yet there's not a trace of hardship about her. I saw her for an hour and a half, and I wouldn't have guessed she'd been in jail if she hadn't told me. I'll tell you something else. She's also from an orphanage. Mr. Toffler grinned, seeing his son roll his eyes in anguish. All right, I won't bother you any more. If she calls me, I'll let you know. And Mr. Toffler left his son's office. Half an hour later, Andrew gave his security chief the task of finding out as much as possible about his father's acquaintance. And a few hours later, a report lay before Andrew, detailing Arlene's short but turbulent life, most importantly, the circumstances of her conviction. Being well versed in business, Andrew immediately recognised that the case had been fabricated, with Arlene serving as a scapegoat for others. He had obtained a photocopy of her prisoner photo. Though blurry and showing the horror on her face from her early days in prison, something about it struck Andrew. Intrigued by the girl, he decided to honour his father's request and meet this strange acquaintance. On the appointed day, Arlene entered the business centre and ascended to the 20th floor. "Hello, are you Arlene Tanner? Andrew is waiting for you. Please come in," the strikingly beautiful secretary said sweetly. Arlene gathered her courage, took a deep breath, as she always did before sparring, and entered the office. The space was enormous, with panoramic windows offering such a spectacular view of the city that Arlene momentarily forgot why she was there. She smiled shyly at the lean, trim man in the impeccable suit. His thick, wheat-coloured hair showed only touches of grey. "Hello, Andrew. Thank you for your time. Frankly, I don't know why I would interest you. You probably know my story, but Mr. Toffler—" Arlene stopped mid-sentence. She noticed the office owner's expression. He hadn't spoken a word, but his eyes were fixed on her face, as if trying to see through her. "Tell me, what was your mother's name?" Andrew asked unexpectedly. "My mother?" Arlene asked, surprised. Having lived most of her life without a mother, such questions were unfamiliar. "Her name was Stacy, according to my birth certificate, anyway." "Stacy Tanner? How old are you?" "No, wait, don't answer that, I'll guess." He sat at his desk, grabbed a pen, and began scribbling frantically in his notebook. "It was the end of '98, the last time she disappeared." Arlene caught fragments of his muttering. "You're 25 now, right?" Andrew suddenly asked, throwing down his pen.
Arlene nodded.
Your father? What's his name? Where is he?
His interrogation grew more intense, his voice becoming eerily strained. That's something I know nothing about, Arlene replied ironically. There's just a dash in that column on my birth certificate. My God, Stacey Tanner, those eyes, that hair, it can't be. Andrew paced the huge office, stopping and starting erratically. Such coincidences don't happen. 25 years old. The hair, the eyes. Yes, there are many Tanners, but everything else. It's like something from a melodrama. With each passing minute, he appeared more unhinged. Arlene began calculating whether she could reach the door before this apparent madman caught her. As if reading her thoughts, Andrew approached with pleading hands. Tears welled in his eyes. Arlene, forgive me, I must seem insane. I can't explain anything right now. I need to think to verify things, but your appearance here is incredible. We'll meet again later, okay? I promise not to frighten you again. I'm terrified myself. It's like a dream. Now you should go. Arlene fled the office, bewildered and deeply unsettled. One thing was certain, she would never return here. The employment service seemed a better option now. That evening, father and son sat in Andrew's spacious apartment. The father silently watched his typically composed and reserved son alternate between sitting, jumping up, and grasping a glass of whiskey, only to freeze before drinking it. Dad! Andrew abruptly sat and placed the untouched glass on the table. Dad, it's her! Stacey's daughter. She's 24. Do you understand what that means? Unable to stay seated, he resumed pacing. It means she might be your daughter too. Mr. Toffler finally voiced what his son feared to say. What are you looking at? I am pretty sure she's your daughter. She looks just like you did at 24. That's why I was staring at her on the train. I see my Andrew sitting across from me. Only a girl. His father tried to defuse the situation with a joke to calm Andrew down. Is that why you said I had to see her? Yes, because I knew you wouldn't believe me. You'll think I'm out of my mind. Dad, do you remember her, Stacey? Father and son fell silent, immersed in memories of many years ago. Stacey was a living landmark of their small, cosy regional town, where one half of the inhabitants knew everything about the other half. Stacey was born into a well-to-do family of quiet, modest intellectuals who had already despaired of having children. Her mother, Charlene, was a paediatrician at the children's clinic. The woman possessed an incredible kindness that radiated to everyone around her. Babies who had been crying in the corridor would fall silent as if by magic the moment they entered her office. She needed only to touch a baby and speak a few words in her quiet, enveloping voice. The whole district cherished their paediatrician, who worked tirelessly, helping to raise generation after generation of children, while remaining childless herself. Charlene's husband John, an engineer, whose specialization was something to do with gas or oil, led a nomadic life for many years. He would appear at home briefly, stay for a few days, then disappear for months. Well, what kind of a family life is that? Neighbours would ask each other meaningfully. Eventually, though, John settled down at home. Then, to the neighbourhood's amazement and joy, Charlene appeared with a clearly visible belly. Finally, exhaled the shopkeepers and others who were delighted for Charlene, who was literally glowing with happiness. Finally a girl was born, and they named her Stacey. My, what voice she has, laughed an elderly nurse, bringing the baby to Charlene's room. In all my years, I've never heard such a strong voice. She's stunned everyone. Charlene smiled happily as she took her screaming treasure into her arms. From birth, Stacy was the centre of attention. Being a late and incredibly long-awaited child, she naturally received not only boundless love, but also an extra measure of anxious care and concern from her parents. However, showing an independent character early on that didn't tolerate excessive coddling, Stacy calmly handled her childhood challenges on her own. She was restless, boyishly active. At home they called her the devil in a skirt, though she rarely wore girls' clothes. Her hands were always scratched, her knees perpetually bruised. Charlene would periodically sigh while pulling another charming dress from the closet, one Stacy had outgrown without ever wearing. "Don't worry, she'll grow up, settle down, and become a proper young lady like you," John would console his wife with a smile. Years passed, and Stacy grew and changed. She eventually stopped running wild around the yard and participating in boys' skirmishes. Her parents channeled her excess energy in a constructive direction by enrolling her in volleyball. Then suddenly, as often happens with children who grow up before everyone's eyes like trees in the yard, yesterday's pretty girl blossomed into an almost otherworldly beauty. Years of volleyball completed the transformation of this duckling, though she was never ugly, into a beautiful swan. By the last grade, Stacy had definitively become the school's star. Though her academic performance wasn't stellar, she maintained satisfactory grades. Above all else, Stacy was absolutely and unshakably convinced of her own exceptionalism. Her belief that the world revolved exclusively around her had taken root in early childhood and never wavered. Her parents tried to temper their daughter's pride, but they could do little to change it now, having made her the family's idol for so many years. Having received her school certificate with more C's than B's, Stacy faced a choice. She could either bury herself in textbooks to prepare for university or college exams, or find a job. But neither option interested her. Accustomed to universal admiration, Stacy believed conquering the universe required just one step: moving to the capital, where she imagined all the world's blessings would instantly fall at her feet. Like hundreds of thousands of young girls who make this journey every year, Stacy left to conquer the capital. Though she had been the leading beauty of her small town district, in the capital she immediately became just another face among countless provincial beauties. The capital remained indifferent to her pretty face, slender figure and lush hair. There was an abundance of such here, but money was needed here first of all, for housing and food. Initially, Stacy tried living in a rented apartment with a friend who had moved to the capital a year earlier. However, this arrangement proved problematic. The apartment was tiny, and the friend's boyfriend also lived there. Leading fashion designers and famous directors, as it turned out, to Stacy's regret, weren't roaming the streets searching for new catwalk or screen stars, and they certainly weren't rushing to call Stacy. The job she found was far from what she'd imagined, while admiring herself in the mirror at home and listening to praises of her beauty. She had to take a job as a waitress in a small restaurant. Reality quickly shattered Stacy's romantic notion of a waitress as an elegantly dressed girl floating around with a tray collecting tips. Instead, she had to wash dishes and floors, launder and iron tablecloths, receive deliveries and handle countless other endless tasks typical of such establishments. Soon, she found separate lodging. It was a tiny room in a poor neglected apartment that had never seen renovation, but the landlady Gina was a kind gentlewoman who didn't charge exorbitant rent. Gradually, Stacy even became friends with Gina. The harsh reality that confronted Stacy frightened her, but the girl didn't consider returning to her parents. That morning promised nothing good. Firstly, Stacy arrived late to work, and at the entrance, instead of encountering Tom, the senior shift manager, who secretly admired her beauty and forgave everything, she ran into Lara, the stern senior administrator, who gleefully fined her. Secondly, Stacy's co-worker had called in sick, meaning she would have to handle double the work. And to top off that, she developed a severe toothache. So bad she considered requesting leave, but the receptionist's glare made it clear that leaving meant not coming back. After half a day of running around with her tooth constantly throbbing, Stacy felt terrible. During a brief lull, she sat down in a corner near the bar. Trying to ease the pulsing pain in her gum, Stacy puffed her cheek, closed her eyes and froze in an awkward comical pose. Suddenly, she felt someone watching her. A tall, handsome young man with unusually coloured blonde hair was observing her. His hair colour could best be described as honey wheat, which, in Stacy's opinion, clashed with his dark suit. Taking the tray from the counter, Stacy headed toward the wheat-blonde man's table. Just steps away, a sharp pain shot through her teeth, making her vision go dark. She lost her balance for a moment and stumbled. The tray tilted, and its contents flew onto the guest. Roast beef and salad decorated his expensive suit. Naturally, she was fired immediately, despite the uncomfortable visitor's noble intervention. After collecting her meagre final pay and hearing the administrator's assurance that no decent establishment would hire her, Stacy stepped outside. Late autumn greeted her with its characteristic wetness and cold from above and below. She turned up her short jacket's collar and walked slowly toward the subway. Lost in thought, she didn't immediately notice the large car following her. Finally, her peripheral vision caught it, and she stopped. The blonde man, whose suit she had ruined, stepped out of the driver's door. "Hello, Stacy, right?" he asked sheepishly. "So they really did fire you. I'm very sorry about that." "Don't be sorry at all. To hell with that slave labour!" Stacy exclaimed passionately. She laughed, tossing her shoulder-length hair and flashing her green eyes. The man watched her with unconcealed admiration. "You know, you're absolutely right. You should be the one being served, not serving others." He paused briefly. "I may smell like Greek salad thanks to you, but if you'd like, let's go to a restaurant to have lunch. Just promise to keep an eye on the waiter when they bring your order, okay?" the blonde man added with mock seriousness. Stacy laughed heartily. The restaurant where the stranger took Stacy was far more upscale than the one she had worked in just hours ago. During their brief drive of a few blocks, she noted his car was expensive and apparently new. It was an opportunity, one she desperately needed just hours ago, now falling right into her hands. "Oh, Stacy, this may sound cliché, and you probably hear it every day, but you are very gorgeous." Stacy responded with a calculated smile, channeling all her charm and seductiveness. Despite wearing worn-out jeans and a plain, not quite clean sweater, Stacy carried herself as though she dressed in evening wear. Her efforts paid off. Andrew, as the man was called, was completely enchanted. At evening's end, he gazed at Stacy intently, thanked her for a wonderful time and offered to take her home. "Whose home?" Stacy nearly blurted out, but caught herself. Andrew drove her to the house, where she rented a room and, with ceremony, helped her from the car. After kissing her hand and expressing his gratitude once more, he bid her farewell. Well, at least I'd eaten well, Stacy thought with some regret, as she climbed to the 3rd floor. The next morning, Stacy opened her eyes to harsh reality. Looking at the cheap, grimy wallpaper, she remembered she would soon lose even this housing. She needed to find work. The situation was so bleak, she recalled the business card from a cafe regular who had often watched her with platonic interest. Once, tucking his card into the bill folder, he had said, "Listen, sweetheart, when you tire of running with trays, give me a call. We'll find you work worthy of that face of yours. Unlike this." Stacey knew exactly what kind of work he meant, but her upbringing and sense of decency had kept her from that path. Though tempted to destroy the card, she'd kept it. Now, holding that small rectangle of cardboard, Stacey froze. It was frightening. She knew that there would be no going back. Still, clutching the card, she approached the unwashed window. In the yard below stood an expensive car, the kind rarely seen in their suburb. Something about it seemed familiar. The hope that had dimmed after his departure yesterday now blazed anew. Quickly preparing herself, Stacey checked her reflection and confirmed she looked perfect. She descended the stairs, paused to assume an air of indifference, and emerged, pretending not to notice the car. Andrew leaped out immediately. "Stacey, hello!" His eyes sparkled as he held out a bouquet of white roses. He won't escape me now, Stacey thought. That same evening, Stacey took charge. She overwhelmed the man with dazzling smiles, flirtatious kisses, seemingly accidental touches, and declarations of eternal gratitude. By day's end, his resistance crumbled, and they spent the night together. A week later, she was living in his apartment on the main avenue of the city. It was comfortable and spacious, and though the decor and furniture seemed dated to her, she settled in contentedly. Andrew had fallen deeply, powerfully in love at first sight. In relationships, he was willing to give everything, while content with even minimal signs of affection in return. Stacey graciously allowed herself to be loved, occasionally granting Andrew physical intimacy. Everyone saw the true nature of their relationship, except Andrew. His father attempted difficult conversations several times. "Son, I've never interfered in your personal life, but don't you think—" "No, Dad, I don't, sorry." Even Gina, Stacey's former landlady, with whom she still occasionally spoke and met on neutral ground, remarked with surprise. "I don't understand you, Stacey. What more do you want? Andrew's perfect. You have a luxury apartment. He wants to marry you. He has money. Are you being foolish? When he throws you out for your games, we'll see how you fare." "No, I'm not being foolish. I need more money. Marriage? I couldn't care less. If he buys me my own apartment, maybe I'll consider it. I'll never get his place. It's in his father's name. Throw me out? No way," Stacey laughed. "He'd sooner see an alien." Then something happened that defied all Stacey's plans and calculations. She fell genuinely in love, completely unexpected to herself. What she had once done to Andrew now happened to her. She lost herself entirely in this new man, disregarding all common sense and prospects. She wanted just one thing: to be near her beloved. Stacey left Andrew with only a note saying she was leaving him for someone else. Andrew never saw her again and knew nothing more of her. Andrew returned to the same old house from which he had taken Stacey, trying to find out something through Gina. But the former landlady either wouldn't talk or truly knew nothing about her trouble-making girl, except that she had left the capital with some biker. The relationship with Stacey left Andrew with a deep wound, a pain he tried to dull with work. Yet there was something he should know. A few weeks after leaving Andrew, Stacey discovered she was pregnant. Unsure whether the father was Andrew or the man for whom she had given up everything. Something stopped her from terminating the pregnancy, and she gave birth to a girl and moved in with kind-hearted Gina. But then Stacy was no longer the blooming beauty who had once come to conquer the capital. She descended into drinking, got involved with another man, and left Gina's place again. But before she had left, placed her 2-year-old daughter Arlene to an orphanage. "Stacy, how could you do this to a child?" Gina was horrified. "But if you don't want her, give her to her father. Isn't Arlene from, what was his name? From Andrew. Give her to him." "No," Stacy grinned. "I won't give him that satisfaction. Don't write me off. I'll get back on my feet and take Arlene back." After that, Gina never saw Stacy again. And now, 25 years later, Andrew returned to the outskirts of the city, to the building where his love story had begun. He hoped Gina still lived in the same house. After asking some boys in the yard, he climbed to the 3rd floor and rang the bell at the shabby door. A timeless woman answered. She could have been 40 or 60. "Hello, are you Gina?" Andrew asked. "Hello, and who are you?" The woman squinted. "Gina, you might remember me. I'm Andrew, your friend Stacy's acquaintance, remember?" Andrew looked at her hopefully, praying she wouldn't slam the door. Recognition dawned in her eyes. "Oh, yes, I remember. What do you want?" "I have a question. Gina, do you know anything about Stacy?" "I haven't heard from her in 20 years. She vanished. She's probably not alive." "Tell me, when she left, was she—" Andrew finally had the courage to ask the main question. "Yes, she was pregnant, though she wasn't sure by whom. She had a girl, named her Arlene. She said she was yours, then gave her to an orphanage. That's all. Hey, are you going to faint? Come on, sit down." A couple of days later, Mr. Toffler called Arlene. Arlene was surprised, certain these strange people would never reappear in her life. "Hello, Arlene," the old man said with peculiar joy. "Arlene, please come to my son's office right away. Where you were last time." "No, Mr. Toffler, even honouring you, I won't. I'm sorry about your son, but they put people in a special hospital for such behaviour. He needs help." "Arlene, I understand. He must have frightened you. He was acting strangely, but he had his reasons. My child, believe me, when you know the truth, you'll want to apologise to your father." Arlene went to the 20th floor and entered the familiar office. A slender man in a perfectly fitted suit rose from behind the desk to meet her. "Hello, my so long missing daughter," he said simply. Faith sat on the windowsill and watched the raindrops dripping down the glass. It was her favourite place in the apartment, though not exactly comfortable. Things were very different in the apartment that could have been her home if she'd managed to talk her husband into buying it. She chose that apartment because of the windowsills, unusually wide, wooden, more like countertops than those narrow plastic strips under windows where even flower pots teeter precariously. Since childhood, a wide windowsill where one could sit comfortably had symbolised coziness for Faith. In her dreams, she pictured herself, beautiful and stylish, reclining against two contrasting cushions, languidly gazing out the window with a steaming mug of coffee. Perhaps these persistent fantasies came from a scene in fashion magazines or a movie, but she desperately wanted such a windowsill. When she saw this apartment, it was love at first sight. Bright, spacious, with a beautiful city view, and, oh wonder, those coveted windowsills that seemed to beckon her. But her husband Jack took his time, wandering from room to room, mumbling to himself, literally sniffing every corner while picking at wallpaper edges and grimacing. "Well, I don't know," he said at last. "There's a lot of, how should I put it, unnecessary things." "For instance?" Faith asked, surprised. "Well, for example, these windowsills," he said, immediately targeting her most treasured for her feature. "Faith, what do we need them for? Do you know that such wide windowsills disturb air circulation? In other words, they waste heat from the radiator. I wouldn't be surprised if all these fancy things, these stupid windowsills, built-in cabinets and tiles, were included in the price." "That's nonsense," Faith snorted. "Everything is nonsense to you?" Jack waved his hand. "Listen, honestly, I don't understand why we should buy an apartment, especially a 3-bedroom one. We'll go bankrupt on utilities alone, and we've got a mortgage to consider. Faith, let's think about this again, okay? After all, we have a place to live. What's wrong with my mother's apartment?" "Everything," Faith answered with her ready response, a conversation they'd had countless times before. "And the most important thing is that it's Mum's, you know. Not yours, not mine, not ours. Your Mum's. I can't even arrange furniture how I want. Don't you mind that we're living not just as a couple, but as 3 people? There are some inconveniences, sure, but at least we can save money instead of going into debt." Jack offered his trump card argument. Yes, the only point worth considering. Faith sighed wearily. Clearly she had a long road ahead to convince Jack to buy their apartment. And really, how could they discuss an apartment when he had made such a fuss today over something as minor as her old coat? "Jack, listen, I think I need a new coat right away." Faith studied her reflection in the mirror. Late autumn had brought freezing mornings, and despite driving to work, the October chill still crept under her coat before she could reach her car's warm interior. She needed warmer clothes if she planned to stay healthy until she and Jack started thinking about children. She loved her spring coat that looked like a cosy grey-brown plaid, the way people love perfectly fitting clothes that become like a second skin over the years. She'd bought it long ago during a trip abroad, and it had become a faithful companion, keeping her warm on cold days, flattering her figure, and even improving her posture. It was one of her favourite possessions, but sadly all good things must end. The mirror revealed the truth clearly now. The lapels and hem were visibly frayed, and the once fine English wool, despite its quality, looked shabby. Worst of all, one of the large patch pockets near the bottom had a mortifying hole that had caused her considerable distress last year. Summer had erased the memory of the torn coat, and Faith had never developed the habit of preparing her wardrobe before each season. Consequently, she always started winter in a wrinkled down jacket, greeted autumn and spring in a creased coat, and her favourite coat typically took 2 weeks of wear to lose its storage wrinkles. Now suddenly, remembering the hole, she literally groaned at her reflection. "Look what a mess!" She slipped her hand into her pocket and wiggled her finger at the hole. "I'm terribly upset, but I can't wear this any more." "Why not? It's a fine coat." Jack suddenly spoke up. "It's English-made, not even worn out. You can't buy such quality now. It's wonderful, no doubt, but I can't walk around with a hole in the most visible place. I don't work in a vegetable garden or as a janitor. I can't show up to work looking like this." "Faith, look, you're not going to buy yourself a cheap coat, are you? I know you. You'll prefer buying an expensive and quality one, but we just don't have it right now. And you're worrying about the coat for nothing." He walked over to his wife, who was stunned into silence.
To be honest, if you hadn't told me about the hole, I wouldn't even have noticed it. It's so tiny. It's not even worth mentioning."
"Tiny? No, wait!" She looked at her husband with determination. "There is a lot to discuss, Jack. I don't understand what's going on. How come I can't even buy myself a coat? Where does our money go? We work? Well, I do, anyway."
"I knew it. I knew you'd give me a hard time about this. So go ahead, say I'm living off you." Jack's voice rang with resentment.
The woman was frightened. "No, Jack, you misunderstood me," she mumbled guiltily. "I didn't mean to offend you at all. I realize this can happen to anyone. You're out of a job. Of course it's sad, but we're a family. We'll manage." Jack stood at the window with an expression of wounded dignity. "Well, darling, please excuse me." Faith, having hung the unfortunate coat on the rack, came up to her husband and gently pressed her head against his shoulder. "To hell with this coat. I'll wear a jacket. Besides, winter's coming soon, and I'll need to switch to a down jacket anyway."
"All right, let's forget it," Jack grumbled, conciliatory. "But don't throw away your coat. It can be sewn up. Let's take it to my mother. She'll fix it. And don't spoil your mood over nonsense. By the way, whose birthday is tomorrow, huh?" He laughed and put his arm around her shoulders. "My favourite wife. Well, I need to run. I'm late. Today's a day off, but I've been offered a job opportunity. I need to meet someone. Talk to him." Jack left long ago, and Faith sat on the windowsill, lost in thoughts about herself, about her family life, which had turned out quite different from what she'd imagined in her dreams, about Jack, about his words and actions. Yet there was nothing special or unusual in her husband's words. Jack simply had one peculiarity that had distinguished him throughout his life. First from the other children, then from his school class, his university group, and finally from adults in general. Jack was a cheapskate, in the truest sense of the word. Everyone had always known it. It was as obvious as the fact that the sun rises in the east and sets in the west. Jack had always been that way, and for Faith it was neither a surprise nor a discovery. She had known Jack almost all her life, with a long break, of course, but practically from birth until today, sharing an apartment and a bed with him for the past 3 years. Yet they were complete opposites. Their families had lived in the same building and within months of each other had brought home their newborns, a boy, Jack, and a girl, Faith. Naturally, they first played in the same sandbox, then attended the same kindergarten and school. Faith occasionally participated in attempts to reform his miserly ways, though more often defended him from overzealous champions of justice. Until 6th grade, Jack had been rather frail and small, and in Faith's opinion, far too loud for his size. She herself was tall and athletic, focusing on swimming, which had developed her arm and shoulder strength. She regularly used this strength to defend her neighbour from bullies who disapproved of his behaviour. Though Jack sometimes irritated her too, he received far more help than fighting from Faith. When Faith and Jack grew up, their paths diverged. Right after school, he disappeared somewhere distant, either to work or study. No one, it seemed, not even Jack's parents, knew for certain. Meanwhile, Faith attended university, earned an economics degree, and began working at a small firm. Life happened in such a way that the firm's business quickly went uphill. Turnover and profits grew, and along with all this grew Faith's career. In a few years, the hard-working, persistent, and pathologically honest young woman rose from an ordinary specialist in the accounting department to head of the economic department. Despite earning enough to buy a decent apartment, she was in no hurry to get her own place and continued living with her mother. She had no father for so long that Faith herself
didn't remember if he had ever been there. Mum worked, it seemed, around the clock, frantically trying to deal with Faith and her older brother during brief breaks between her work shifts. Personal life was something she apparently didn't even think about. By the time Faith and Tucker grew up, their mother had neither strength nor desire for it. Faith, now an adult, felt too sorry for her mother to leave her alone in the quiet, empty apartment. That's why she lived in her childhood room, still covered with pink, though quite yellowed wallpaper. "Faith, you should at least change the wallpaper in your room," Mum would laugh quietly. "What for?" Faith would joke back. "I look at it and feel like a little girl." "Always sitting at home in the evenings. Look, Faith, you'll die here an old maid," her brother would tease during his occasional visits home. "Listen, let me introduce you to some of my friends." "Why not? I know some decent guys. We'll find a younger one, clean him up, give him a haircut, maybe even a shave, and get you married." "I can do without you and your friends." Faith would wave him off, but Tucker, though not meaning to offend his sister, had inadvertently touched her soul. Jokes aside, Faith's single status was indeed dragging on. Celebrating her 29th birthday, she sat before the mirror and asked herself frankly, "What is wrong with you, Faith? Why are you still alone?" The question required serious reflection because generally everything else was in order. She was healthy, educated, independent, self-confident, and with a well-paid job. At work she managed a department of 7 people. She had many friends, including her dear friend Mary. Mary insisted all men were worth nothing, declaring that women should ignore them completely and live freely, without washing socks, wiping noses, or cooking soup. Yet this passionate conviction hadn't stopped Mary herself from being a loving wife and mother to 2 charming twins for several years. "So what?" Mary would snort when Faith pointed out this contradiction. "Trust me," Mary would complain, "I haven't read a book in 5 years, even on my one day off. I can't lie quietly or take a proper bath. Within 5 minutes, someone always bursts through the door, yelling about a bursting bladder or needing something they absolutely cannot live without. Before I can even wash up." Faith would nod sympathetically at her friend's words. Of course, it seemed horrible that a woman couldn't even take a peaceful bath. Yet, when she returned home and sank into her own fragrant bubble bath, she found herself dreaming of someone knocking on the door or bursting in, demanding her attention and breaking the silence she'd grown weary of. Like many women, Faith began searching for the root of her problems in her appearance. The mirror told her honestly that she'd never be asked to model. Her nose could be shorter, her skin clearer, her hair thicker, and her eyes, especially in the morning before her beauty routine, were mere slits, far from what anyone would call beautiful. But with effort in hair and makeup, she transformed into quite a pretty young woman, with a special charm in the dimples that appeared when she smiled without hesitation. Her figure was still good, thanks to 8 years of swimming and athletic discipline. Lately, she'd noticed some concerning signs that her fitness was waning, and perhaps it was time to consider a gym membership or return to swimming. But nothing was critical yet. Not enough, at least, to be the main cause of her loneliness. Faith continued her self-examination, buying beautiful clothes she had nowhere to wear, going on solitary tourist trips where she pretended to be a traveller seeking romantic solitude, and shyly asking strangers to photograph her in front of landmarks. As a rule, the photos turned out completely ridiculous, with her twisted or clenched face and bulging eyes. However, she didn't dare, or didn't have an opportunity to retake the shot, though she wanted pictures where she looked beautiful, with her hair flowing, not tousled, and most importantly, not alone. Faith sat in her friend's kitchen, watching as Mary stirred something in a pot with one hand, while holding a phone to her ear with the other, somehow managing to scold her mumbling son with a menacing look. "Mary, how do people actually meet nowadays? Where?" she asked when Mary hung up the phone, shooed her troublemaking kid out of the kitchen. Her friend, stirring something hopelessly burnt, launched into a tirade about foolish women who, instead of living peacefully and enjoying life, were looking for a noose around their necks. A few months ago, Mary lent her friend a stunning rhinestone-studded dress and sent her to a fashionable art exhibition, where, according to her, one might meet some decent prospects. Decent prospects may have been there, but none approached Faith with marriage proposals, and she herself didn't venture beyond trivial conversations with a few acquaintances. Then came the trip to an upscale country hotel, for which Faith, internally wincing, spent enough money to fund a month-long island vacation. Given the accommodation prices, there should have been herds of eligible millionaires roaming about, and indeed one specimen with a whiskey glass did try to strike up a conversation with the lonely, bored Faith, but when she noticed the telling untanned strip on his ring finger, she promptly disappeared into her room. "Well, you could have at least talked to him. You wouldn't die over it. I'll tell you a secret. To meet a man, you actually have to respond when he speaks. Can you imagine?" Maria was furious when Faith reported the trip's 0 results. "God, how do they keep you employed, let alone in charge? You can't say a word." How could Faith explain to Mary that at work she was an entirely different person, confident, strong, understanding everything she said and did? There she was in her element. But in unfamiliar settings, especially with strange men, she turned wooden, catastrophically tongue-tied, her face growing dour as she lowered her head and began to blush inevitably. There was also that questionable night at the club with friends. The informal setting was supposed to help Faith relax and finally make a meaningful connection. Instead, she didn't know how to dance like the other club-goers did, and alcohol wasn't really her thing. After sitting stiffly until midnight, thoroughly deafened by the unusually loud and harsh music, she gratefully escaped into the fresh air. Following her failed debut as a public event star, Faith decided to take matters into her own hands and created an online dating profile. After carefully crafting her questionnaire, she waited for that special prince, who surely must be searching the internet for her, and her alone. The outcome was unexpected. She received requests for bank card details, requests for provocative photos, and a suspicious link which she regretted clicking. After that, she abandoned online dating altogether. Still alone, Faith repeatedly convinced herself that she wasn't some unwanted failure, but rather an independent, self-sufficient woman who simply hadn't met the right man yet. But late at night, after confirming her mother's TV was off, she would bury her face in her pillow, her claims of self-sufficiency and independence dissolving into tears. Then her mother joined the campaign for her daughter's happiness, attempting to introduce Faith to various men. Mother's candidates, however, were typically world-weary and rather amusing. Faith politely declined these favourable matches, prompting her mother to lament that she would die without having grandchildren to dote on, conveniently forgetting that her eldest son, Tucker, regularly left his 2 little rascals in her care. The only thing her mother's interference achieved was making Faith consider buying her own apartment and start coming home later, after starting her mother's favourite evening shows. The woman was an ardent fan of soap operas, so engrossed in the TV and so concerned about the fate of various Brazilian or Turkish orphans that even her own daughter's problems temporarily faded into the background. One summer evening, Faith sat on a bench near the entrance, squinting in the gentle evening sun, waiting for the sounds of passionate Brazilian arguments to drift down from the open first-floor window. "Faith? You? Well, hello!" She heard a voice above her head. In front of her stood a tall, sturdy man with an incredibly familiar face. The face was so handsome that she momentarily forgot about trying to identify him, just staring instead. His stylishly maintained stubble framed his face perfectly, harmonizing with the dark hair that fell across his forehead. He looked like he'd stepped out of a Turkish soap opera. Faith, unlike her mother, wasn't particularly fond of such shows. Still, the young man before her was as striking as any leading man from those passion-filled dramas. "Jack?" Faith gasped in amazement. "Wow, look at you! I didn't even recognize you at first. Listen, we haven't seen each other for about 8 years, right?" "Yes, longer perhaps. Probably since high school." Jack smiled. "Well, tell me, how are you doing?" Faith asked and moved over on the bench, politely making room for Jack. He sat down beside her readily. Nothing special. Nothing to brag about. I tried working in the north, but couldn't handle it. Can you imagine? It's cold there." "Really? Who would have thought?" Faith laughed freely and easily, in a way she hadn't for ages. "Yeah, I'm shocked myself." Jack joined in her laughter. They sat, talking about everything, reminiscing about their turbulent childhood. Jack even thanked Faith sincerely for her long-ago intercession, which he still remembered. "By the way, why are you still sitting here? Not coming home?" Jack suddenly asked. "You still live here, right?" "Yes, I live here as I used to," she nodded. "With Mum? Are you still single?" Jack suddenly asked. Instead of telling him it was none of his business or that such direct questions were inappropriate, Faith surprised herself by playfully shaking her head and saying, "Imagine, no one wants me." Perhaps it was because Jack was familiar, someone she'd known for so many years. Being with him felt surprisingly natural. Words that would normally never cross her mind, or at least stay stuck in her throat, flowed easily with Jack. "No one wants you? What fools," said Jack, suddenly serious. "I would." "You're lying," Faith teased. "All you men are cheaters and liars, only able to promise a poor girl many things and then go to the bushes." "No. Wait, Faith," Jack said with unexpected solemnity. "I'm perfectly serious. Marry me." "Jack, the North must have frozen your brain." She laughed again. "What are you talking about? Well, I'm off. We have—" She nodded at her apartment window. "Oh, can you hear that? Carmelita's already been with Ignatia and now regrets it. It'll be a good 20 minutes, so I can eat dinner in peace while my mum sympathizes with the poor girl. Nice seeing you, Jack. Bye." She waved goodbye to her old friend and hid in the entryway. Well, look at that. Jack went from an ugly duckling to such a swan. Who would have thought? She mused before falling asleep. The next evening, after parking her car in the usual spot, she nearly walked straight into a bouquet of flowers. Looking up, she saw Jack holding gorgeous white roses. "Oh, Jack, you look impossibly handsome," Faith exclaimed sincerely. Jack cut a striking figure in his white shirt with thin blue stripes and dark jeans. "Are you going on a date?" she continued, not waiting for his response. "Ooh, I envy your date partner. Such a gentleman. Picture perfect. And these flowers, just amazing." "That is to say, you envy yourself?" Jack smiled. "I don't understand," Faith said. "The flowers are for you, and I dressed up like this to please you. If you agree, I'd like to invite you somewhere for a proper conversation. Faith, please don't refuse." She looked around, confused. This had to be some kind of trick, a prank. His friend was probably hiding nearby, ready to jump out laughing. "Jack, what are you doing?" Faith ventured. "Nothing. I'm just inviting you to a restaurant, that's all." Jack smiled. "Okay, since you're so distrustful, I'll tell you everything straight. We bumped into each other yesterday by chance. When I saw you, I suddenly realized I really like you. I guess I've always liked you, maybe since high school. I just didn't realize it then." "From school?" Faith could not overcome her amazement and confusion. "So you fell in love with me in high school? Huh? I wonder if it was after I hit you in the forehead with a basketball, or when the girls and I locked you in the girls' restroom." Jack sighed and said, "I don't remember exactly. Maybe it was then, or maybe it was after you defended me from 3 eighth graders. I don't know. Faith, you'd better say yes or no, because half the neighbours are staring out the windows at us." They settled down at a table in a small, cosy restaurant. "Faith, let's go back to our conversation from yesterday," Jack suddenly suggested. "Is it about you asking me to marry you?" She laughed. "Jack, aren't you tired of this? Maybe I should hit you again to make you come to your senses." "So you don't believe me?" He raised an eyebrow, well aware that it suited him terribly. "Not a bit," Faith nodded vigorously, fighting Jack's charms. "You, Faith, are a surprisingly down-to-earth person." He sighed. "Well, how can I prove that I'm serious and really want you to marry me?" "Eat a napkin," Faith blurted out. Jack looked at her with sad eyes, reached out, picked up the napkin lying on the table, and bringing it to his mouth, began to squeeze its edge slowly. "That's it. I believe, stop it," Faith whispered, looking around and wincing with laughter. "I agree." The next day, Faith sat in the kitchen and tried to explain herself to her mother. "Mother, I am 29 years old. 29! And I've kissed once in my life, and that was mistakenly, someone else's mistake, because they thought I was someone else in the dark." Faith grinned and looked at her mum. Yes, it probably all looks strange from the outside. Hasty, maybe even stupid, to marry after a few hours of meeting. But what hours, Mum? I've known Jack for 29 of my 29 years. That's certainly not what you'd call a hasty acquaintance, is it? What does it have to do with how long you've known him? Mum looked at her daughter more seriously than ever. How can you marry without love, without real feeling? It's not right, my daughter. I don't know how wrong it is, Mum, but I'm tired of being alone. And Jack is the only man who's interested in me, genuinely interested, and I can feel it. I know him like the back of my hand. He can't fool me. But seriously, Mum, I like him a lot. A few months later, Jack and Faith married, to the amazement of the whole neighbourhood. Well, laughed the neighbours, now we believe in the saying, first comes fighting, then comes love. They used to scuffle on the playground so terribly. To Faith's surprise, who had planned to discuss buying a separate apartment before the wedding, Jack suddenly said, Faith, listen, let's not rush this, eh? This is a serious matter. We shouldn't make hasty decisions. Let's save up some more money. I want to contribute my share too. I'm not a freeloader after all. That sounded reasonable and honourable. Besides, it turned out that Jack didn't mind sharing the apartment with Faith's mother. She suddenly threw herself into taking care of the young family, rediscovered her culinary skills, and began spoiling the children, as she called them, with masterpieces of home cooking. Jack quickly found work at a respectable firm as a sales representative, and, being naturally charming and sociable, began earning good money. On their wedding anniversary, Faith surprised them with a trip to the Spanish coast. But she had to convince Jack to accept it, because the visa and trip were already paid for, tickets bought and suitcases packed. "How could you?" he protested. "No, Faith, you can't do this. You didn't even consult me." "Of course I didn't consult you. I knew you'd never agree," Faith laughed. "Of course I wouldn't. Such money!" exclaimed Jack. "Jack, don't be angry. Let it be our gift to ourselves for the first anniversary." Faith hugged her husband and silently praised herself for downplaying the trip's cost when she'd told Jack. "Perhaps if he knew the full amount, he'd divorce me immediately," she thought jokingly. But soon it became difficult for her to pull such tricks, because Jack firmly took control of their family finances. He invested money at interest, transferred funds to a joint account, and even handled the grocery shopping and household items. "Oh, Faith, you're hopeless with money," he explained. "All you want to do is rush through the store as quickly as possible. You're always filling the cart with expensive items, and you shop at the priciest store just because it's on your way home. We'll never save anything that way, my dear." Faith shrugged and felt only grateful that she didn't have to go shopping anymore. A couple of years passed. Now she had a man by her side who, though sometimes behaving like the famous Scrooge McDuck, was gentle, attentive, caring. He always tucked in her blanket, made tea with lemon, and bought her favourite apples. But all that paled in comparison to what mattered most. She was no longer alone. Then Jack lost his job. His firm suddenly went bankrupt and let all employees go. "Should I accept a lower-paying position?" he asked his wife. "I don't want to lower our standard of living, but a job like my own one won't be easy to find." "Jack, dear," Faith exclaimed, "no one's saying you should take the first offer. Take your time, look around, compare options. We're not starving. We have money, clothes, shoes. I'm earning enough, so please don't worry." "All right then, it's settled. I'll look for a proper position while you support us both." Jack nodded calmly and turned on the TV. Perhaps it was at that moment that Faith first felt a sense of injustice. She was working like a horse, even taking on extra reports, something she'd never done before, while patching holes in her tights with nail polish. She was technically the head of the family, at least measured by income, yet here she was, reassuring Jack not to worry, while he graciously agreed. Catching herself thinking this way, she scolded herself. "You've been quite awful, Faith. Jack's in a tough spot, and here you are counting who owns what. Some loving and faithful wife you are." Jack's unemployment stretched on. He'd disappear all day and return with a guilty, charming smile. He'd joke about tightening their belts and tell Faith not to get upset if the apartment she chose would be sold. Months passed this way, and now here she was, Faith, a happy wife and highly paid professional, sitting on the windowsill wondering how to work in a coat with holes. Her thoughts returned to that unfortunate coat. She could check if the hole could be fixed. Maybe she could visit her mother or Jack's mother to repair it. She could always hide that cursed hole by her purse. With a sigh, Faith slid off the windowsill and trudged to the coat rack where her favourite but worn-out coat hung. Running her palm over it, she suddenly felt something hard underneath. Pushing her coat aside, she found Jack's light jacket. Something long and rectangular bulged from the zippered pocket, stretching the thin raincoat fabric taut against its sharp corners. Faith gently pressed the fabric against the box and froze. Through the translucent material, she clearly saw the familiar name of the jewellery company. She knew exactly what kind of jewellery they sold and how much it cost. Wow, Faith thought in amazement, sinking into the sofa. So Jack was planning to give her an outrageously expensive birthday present. Given the box size, it couldn't be a ring, though even their rings cost a fortune. It's probably a bracelet or something massive. It must be insanely expensive, and I reproached him, thinking he's a cheapskate because of this stupid coat. He might have been saving up for a year for this gift, putting it off, worrying. The woman thought and laughed happily, leaning back on the sofa. "Faith, dear, happy birthday," she heard the next morning. She barely opened her eyes, as usual on weekends, and stared at her husband, confused. Jack, radiant and almost dressed to leave, stood in the doorway. "Are you leaving?" she asked, trying to fully wake up. "Today's a day off." "Well, it's a day off for you, hard workers. For us unemployed lazybones, the day of the week doesn't matter." Jack smiled. "Seriously, Faith, I have to leave. Another conversation about a possible job. But I'll definitely be home tonight. Cake, wine, everything. Oh, I almost forgot the most important thing. Happy birthday, darling." He leaned over and kissed her cheek. "Here's a little present from me. Sorry it's modest, but such are the times." Faith stared at the red paper-wrapped package. The paper was suspiciously similar to the one she had used for Jack's last present. It was, but that wasn't the point. What she held in her hands, neither in shape nor size, resembled anything like a jewellery case from a famous firm. "Is this for me?" she asked, confused. "Of course." Jack nodded happily. "And what's in your pocket? Who's that for?" Faith almost said it, then bit her tongue. "Thank you, sweetie. I'll see you tonight." Jack kissed her cheek once more and left. Faith gazed thoughtfully at the gift from her beloved and loving husband. It was a rather gaudy large mug with a drawing and inscription on the side. Her name, Faith, was written between curlicues, with the full added at the bottom in smaller print. Yes, she was Faithful Faith. Faith grinned, picked up a black marker, and added the word fool. It turned out beautifully and meaningfully. The jewellery case was no longer in the apartment. She checked everywhere, despite how disgusted she felt at that moment. Jack came from a simple, ordinary family. His mother had worked for years in the district polyclinic's registry office. She was a kind, quiet woman with clear eyes. She loved her Jack, her late and only child. She would rush home during breaks to warm up his lunch, ensure he wore his hat and scarf to training, and in the evenings, despite being tired and cold, and algebraic functions, Jack loved his mother and respected her. Yes, this didn't stop him from wrapping her around his finger, almost literally. Jack's father, who believed in stricter methods of raising a real man, rarely had the chance to implement these methods. As a truck driver making long-distance trips across the country, he was often away from home for weeks. During those brief periods when the man came home, he had little influence on his son's upbringing, though he tried. Believing devoutly in the miraculous properties of gymnastics and contrast showers, he would mercilessly wake the unfortunate adolescent for morning routines. His educational system also included daily homework checks, mandatory household chores, and, peculiarly, reading classical fiction, though his father himself only ever read one book, as far as Jack could tell. The Handbook of Amateur Fishermen. But there was no point arguing. The boy would mentally count the days his father would be home and sigh miserably. Kicking aside the hated heavy dumbbell, he'd skip his evening neighbourhood run and brace himself for his father's inevitable shouting about his D grades. "Only a complete moron can get a D in such a subject." He'd hear his father's voice in advance in his mind. These conversations between father and son happened regularly, with only the tone and subject name changing. "How can anyone possibly get a 2 in geography?" "Easily," Jack would mutter in reply in his defence. Sometimes he emerged from these arguments, if not victorious. Then, at least feeling he'd gotten some revenge. "All right," said his father eagerly. "Let's see. What's your geography D for?" "Well, for the capitals of European countries," Jack reluctantly confessed. "Oh God, Europe? Not even Africa?" marvelled his father. "Did you hear, Nina? What kind of fool are you nurturing here? He doesn't even know the capitals of European countries. Everyone knows that." "Really?" Jack grinned wickedly and vindictively. "Well, if everyone knows, then tell me the capital of Lithuania." "Tallinn." "What? No." "What do you mean, no? Why are you making faces at me?" The man looked at his son, his wicked smile faltering as he began to hesitate. Actually, wait, no, not Tallinn. Riga. Yeah, definitely Riga." "Again, no," the boy said triumphantly. "Wait." The self-proclaimed home educator and geography expert sputtered. "What have we got there? Tallinn, Riga, and what's its name? Well, the third city. Always forget it, damn. What is it, Nina?" "Well, you don't know, but you say everyone knows," Jack stubbornly countered. His father looked at his son in confused anger and resorted to the classic parental defence. "So what? I'm near retirement. How many years ago did I learn this? I could have forgotten, but you learn it now, and then it just slips your mind." Then finally his father would pack up and leave for another trip, and Jack would exhale with relief. The dumbbells were shoved under the closet again, books arranged on the shelves, and lessons postponed until after playing outside. This mix of maternal and paternal upbringing resulted in Jack growing up fairly normal, though spoiled. When his unusual, almost pathological greed first appeared is difficult to pinpoint. In kindergarten, little Jack took toys from other children, but almost all children do that. What set him apart was his habit of smuggling these toys home, hidden in his pants or under his coat, despite his teacher's warnings and his mother's gentle reproaches. As Jack grew older, he discovered that his compulsion to possess everything he wanted didn't sit well with others. In fact, they disliked it so much that he got beaten up in the yard a few times for trying to take others' bikes or cars. The nickname Selfish Piggy, given by the other children, stung, and he resolved to change. But his peers either didn't notice his efforts or didn't believe them, and he never formed any close friendships during his school years. Only Faith, a long-nosed tomboy from the second entrance, with broad shoulders, inexplicably sympathized with him and helped him through difficult times. His education was more an ordeal than a journey. Even with his aging father, who had stopped taking long trips and was home more often, yelling at him more frequently, things didn't improve. Though, perhaps thanks to this peculiar form of attention to his academic performance, Jack managed to get C's with B's in an even way. After school, Jack fled from his father, whose moral lectures had become unbearable in his old age, and from his mother, whose kindness and well-meaning but futile guidance suffocated him. After all, what good were $20 and homemade cutlers when he craved thousands and fine dining? The only inheritance he claimed was bitterness toward his parents, who remained in their shabby two-bedroom apartment, having neither earned nor saved anything. Why have a child at all without the desire, intelligence or means to give them a better life than your own? He often thought. He enrolled in not very popular and low-ranged college, but quickly realized that memorizing facts, sitting through lectures and mingling with penniless classmates held no appeal. However, among his notably attractive classmates, a promising prospect emerged. A wealthy man's daughter, who surprisingly responded quickly to his attention. So quickly, in fact, that they soon found themselves in bed together. Soon she suddenly claimed rights to him, prattling about marriage and meeting her father. But Jack mysteriously lost interest in her and had to diplomatically explain that she had mistaken his attentions and he had no desire for a lifelong commitment. The girl seemed to understand everything but was clearly offended. That's why Jack didn't take any risks and fled as far from his hometown as possible. Thus, he ended up in the far north. Jack, feeling safe at last, settled in a small, perpetually frozen town, where summer's arrival was marked only by the sun refusing to set below the horizon. He survived for a few years, working as a labourer at a processing plant, living in a rented room and practising his masculine charms on the unsophisticated local ladies. But eventually he grew bored. The cold never became familiar, even after several years. Each winter Jack marvelled at the thermometer readings and his body's ever-creative responses to the frost. His organism, as he called it, never repeated the same reaction twice. During his first polar winter, Jack's fingers froze. In his second, it was his ears. He grew weary of the hard, dirty work that left every joint, ligament and bone aching. The mosquitoes tormented him in summer, leaving not mere marks, but holes in his skin so deep he felt he could peer inside himself. The local people remained strange and distant. Their constant smiling and shoulder-slapping struck him as foolish, as if they were pretending to be happy instead of admitting that life in this cursed land was unbearable, and they were all there out of desperation. And then there was the endless poverty. Despite decent wages and Jack's characteristic frugality, it wasn't what he'd dreamed of. He soon realized he wouldn't earn the money he needed here, even if he sacrificed all his extremities to the north. So he decided to return to his hometown, come what may. His first option was his parents' apartment. His retired father had grown insufferable over the years. Sometimes Jack felt the old man might slam his fist on the table any moment and yell, "What did you get in geography today, you bum? Show me your diary." His mother, also aged, was so overjoyed at his return that she seemed slightly unhinged. How else to explain the morning milk porridge and the ghastly, coloured shaggy sweater she began knitting for his winter wear? Jack endured it all while contemplating his next move. No profession, no job, no family, no housing, not even friends. A perfect situation for his approaching 30th birthday. "Mum, Mum!" Jack stood at the window, leaning against the frame and fidgeting with the curtain's edge, looking down into the yard. "Mum, who's that? The one with the white car pulling out. Is that Faith?" His mother joined him at the window. "Yes, that's Faith." "The latest model car?" Jack muttered under his breath. Then, louder, "Why is she around here? Visiting her mother?" "Visiting? No, she lives here just like before," the mother said. "Here?" Jack raised his eyebrows. "In the same apartment as her mother?" Why not, if they're comfortable? It's not about comfort, Mum, Jack grinned. It's just that at our age, parents can sometimes get in the way. Pardon my frankness. Well, nobody interferes with Faith, his mother replied, slightly irritated. What's wrong with you, son? You're so difficult to understand. Our Faith hasn't developed a personal life yet. She lives here with her mother, and honestly, I think she's afraid to leave her alone. The poor woman has been having heart problems lately. Listen, Mum. Jack cut her off, uninterested in the elderly neighbour's ailments, but eager to learn more about the young woman with the fancy car. So you're saying Faith lives with her mother? Has she never been married? No, and I don't understand why. Faith was always such a nice girl, and now she's pretty, independent, earns good money. Earns? Jack asked, trying to mask his keen interest. Yes, imagine. Faith's such a clever girl. She's achieved everything on her own. Her mother told me she's the head of finance at a big firm. You know it. We even have their advertisement in front of our market. Jack nodded seriously. The company name on the billboard his mother mentioned was well known to him. It wasn't just big, it was enormous. And now it turned out that their Faith was practically the chief financial officer. The conversation grew more intriguing. Why doesn't she buy her own apartment if she earns good money? Jack asked. I've already explained. Mum threw up her hands in frustration. She doesn't want to leave her mother alone. It's no picnic living by yourself. Though her mother mentioned that she has savings for an apartment. God willing, everything will work out for our girl, and a good man will be found. Do you remember her brother Tucker? He already has 2 boys. The mother continued to say something, but Jack didn't listen to her. He already knew everything he needed to know. Faith continued to live with her mother, and to all appearances, she had no one. Well, seriously, anyway. She has money, and it looks like a lot of money. Just look at the kind of car she drives. No, he wasn't exactly self-serving to the core. He really liked her, and it wasn't his fault that this pretty young woman was also wealthy. It was just a coincidence. Why should he, Jack, be embarrassed about anything? Faith had grown up quite handsome during these years while he was in the north. She had stopped wearing stretchy jeans and t-shirts. Instead, she had moved into strict, stylish pantsuits that fit her perfectly. Her once perpetually wet, pool-damaged hair that used to be carelessly twisted at the back of her head was now worn long and blonde just below the shoulders, thick and shiny. In general, Faith had blossomed into, if not a beauty, then at least quite an attractive young woman. Yet there was still some insecurity about her, a shyness, as if she was constantly apologizing for her presence. It was strange, but it was striking even to him as he watched his old acquaintance from the second-floor window. The strategic plan was clear, and after catching up with Faith, one evening as she sat on a bench, he began to put it into practice. The watch on her wrist and the obviously diamond earrings only confirmed the correctness of his actions. Marry this girl. Faith, save up money, lots of it, and buy a really decent apartment, or better yet, a house, so that there would be something to share in a divorce, if it came to that. And really, how bad could it be? The main thing was to get out and not return to his crazy father and mother with her prickly wool green sweater. That's what he thought at the time, and it all worked out. He'd lived 3 great years on Faith's money. Honestly, let them not believe him, but he would have lived like that forever. Perhaps over time he would have truly grown attached to Faith and begun to feel real tenderness for this naive and kind simpleton beyond mere gratitude. And from there, love wouldn't be far behind. Perhaps they would even buy that very apartment with the ridiculous oversized windowsills, and they'd have a child, or even two, and live happily ever after. Why not? But then Veronica came along and everything went to hell. Beautiful, demanding, determined. She suppressed him, enslaved him, completely subjugated him to her will, and on Faith's birthday he couldn't refuse to see her either. He could never refuse her anything at all, especially since it was a great occasion. He could finally give Veronica something worthy of her, an absolutely stunning bracelet. But he came home like a fool, regretting to wipe the lipstick off his face, or rather, without even thinking about it. "Please, pack up and leave," Faith said. There was no cake, no salads, no wine on the table. There was only a mug, which he had bought at the last moment at the nearest kiosk. Jack didn't argue, or prove anything, or explain himself. After all, it was just another D that life had given him. Faith walked out of the store, breathed in the fresh autumn air with pleasure, and shrugged. It was warm and cosy. Her hands slipped into the large, deep pockets and felt the soft, slightly fleecy woolen surface beneath with pleasure. This wonderful, just-bought coat sat on her figure perfectly, as if moulded to her, and even seemed to whisper in her ear, gently caressing her face. "Take it, you must take it. Don't doubt it. We'll be excellent together, I promise. I'm sorry, but what a wonderful smile you have. Just please move away from the edge of the sidewalk before someone splashes mud on you." She heard a soft male voice. A tall, dark-haired man stood nearby, looking at her with admiration. "Your new coat suits you remarkably well, and if I were a little more brazen, I'd have the courage to invite you for a cup of coffee." "How do you know it's new?" she asked, smiling happily for some reason. "Well, it's just that you have—" He awkwardly pointed behind her back, as if embarrassed. Faith reached up and fumbled for the cardboard label dangling behind her collar and laughed loudly, cheerfully, freely.